Hello, welcome back for the final time. Yes, days later, he finally changed his shirt. Yeah, so this is the What Are You Wearing segment. What are you wearing?
I am wearing Motoko Kusanagi, a gift from our good friend Donovan. Very
Our
thoughtful. He
mutual
knows me
boyfriend?
too well. Exactly.
And I wore My Last of Us from Redbubble. So you've got little
Ooh.
Ellie, you've got a elk, deer, some cordyceps, and then there's the fireflies. I don't know if you can see it. And then the bracelet that once belonged to Dina there. So
And
I'm
that
all
came
set
from
to go.
the collector's
It
edition.
did. Yeah, I like how they call it Ellie's bracelet. I'm like, I don't think that's her bracelet, but I guess maybe she has ownership now.
Ooh.
Yeah, that could have been a completely, when I was typing up notes before we had the game, I had all sorts of things of like bury your gaze trope, women
Yeah.
in refrigerators trope, and then I had to erase it because it didn't happen. So
I was expecting it, but
I
nope.
know. Yeah, I was too, which I guess they did it on purpose. I mean, I forgot to
Yeah.
talk about this, that one of their with Joel at the end and said, "Did you think I was going to let you do this alone?" That happens to be
Yeah.
Jesse. So they recorded a new thing for that to lead us off the trail. And then all of the gameplay when you're in Seattle, you only see Ellie. You never, which
Mm.
is you're with Dina for a lot of those scenes. So they did a good job to um, with their trail, but that just meant I was in suspense, and I think I called in one of my diary entries anticipatory grief because I just
Yeah.
thought Dina's gonna die, when's it gonna happen, what's going on, and it was just too much. It was too much.
It was. I really like Dina too, so I did not want to see her get killed.
Yes, same. So this is our final chapter or part, and we're going to talk about the characters. And let me go through because I think they deserve it. They deserve that respect, the actors and the characters, the roles that they played. So Joel, played by Troy Baker, Ellie, Ashley Johnson, Jerry, Derek Phillips. Who is
Jerry.
Jerry? Oh, wait a minute.
My favorite, Jerry.
Who is
No grapes, no nuts.
Wait, who's Jerry?
It's Jerry.
Okay, we'll think about this, but thank you, Derek Phillips, for being there.
Yes.
Tommy Jeffrey Pierce, Jesse Stephen Chang, Maria, Ashley Scott, Seth Robert Clotworthy, Dina Shannon Woodward, Abby Laura Bailey, Owen Patrick Fugit, which I had to look him up, and I was like, oh, almost famous. Manny Alejandro Eda, Nora Chelsea Tavares, Mel Ashley Birch, Jordan Chase Austin, who was Little Sam in Uncharted 4, Mike Rubin Langdon, Whitney Maggie McDonald, Marlene Merle Dandridge, Emily Swallow, Yara Victoria Grace, and the amazing Lev Ian Alexander. Jerry. Do you think Jerry, I guess, given his placement, he must be in Jackson?
I guess so. Oh, was he the guy who was dead? No, that doesn't make any sense. That was like Oliver or something. No, I can't spot a Jared, but also did you mention Jeffrey Wright as Isaac?
I did forget that. Thank you.
That
Yes.
was a good performance too.
Yes, it certainly was. Got some Westworld
Yeah, Westworld.
alums. See, I had to think about that one. Okay, here we go. Characters. So we're going to basically go through the characters, and then at the end we've got the groups as well. I have a kind of a complicated question at the beginning, though. Do you feel like all of the characters are just variations on a theme? Are they just like, is there just one idea and then they sort of just change it up, or do you think they're all are they all distinct in their own way?
I mean, I think based on what I know of writing fiction, that is probably a good idea, or at least a good starting point to have like one idea and how each character sort of is a variation of it. But I also think you could say that for the primary characters that they're all kind of shades of each other, which I think reflects the themes of empathy and things like that. But yeah, that's certainly a good way to think about it. What did you think about that one?
Um, I think they're all pretty distinct. I think when you get into the different groups, then you start to see like this is our archetype, and then how do they change from that, like Seraphites
Yeah,
or wolves or even Jackson potentially. I think the people that I see as like two sides of the same coin would certainly be Abby and Ellie. Like I think they're more similar than people might feel comfortable thinking
right,
about, just because Abby killed Joel, but I feel like they really are similar. But yeah, I think there's enough distinction to, especially for the characters that we learn more about. Like we don't really get to know Jordan too much,
right.
but yeah, we get to see a bit. Oh boy. Well, shall we start with Ellie then?
I think that's, although she is not our starting character, we actually start the game as Joel, but I think that
That
makes
well,
sense.
how what do you want to do? Do you want to do Joel first?
No, I think Ellie makes more
Okay.
sense.
So Ellie, does she become Joel? Or was this her character's destination all along to become sort of this person that was obsessed with violence, or just a violent individual?
I mean, I think Joel, where he ends his story, he's definitely trying to escape from that and start over. But his whole thing was about survival. And that can be a selfish act disguised as a selfless one because it's like, well, I'm working for you, Ellie, making this choice for you. Whereas the revenge is actually kind of similar, I guess, because it's like, well, I'm doing this for Joel, when she's just doing it for herself. And she is endangering her family and everything. So yeah, I didn't want to immediately draw that parallel because I think it's too convenient or maybe too trite, perhaps. But I think it's important, and the way they go about it is pretty subtle. And there is a lot that is subtle. I mean, you already mentioned the Ellie Abby binary, which is maybe not such a dichotomy. And they didn't have to say like, "We're the same, you and I." You know, it was just it was subtle.
Yeah, absolutely. And it I feel like the journey there is, it's not like she's immediately Joel. I
Right.
think she struggles with what she's doing. I mean, the hands shaking is something we see two times, one of which being after she tortures and then presumably kills Nora.
Hmm.
So it's clearly hard for her to do some of this, and she has remorse when she kills Mel and finds out that Mel is pregnant. I think a lot of my thought that she becomes Joel to a sense is like just making poor decisions, that
Yeah.
it's like very emotional decisions of this is how it needs to be, and doesn't think about other stuff. So the moment that Jesse is like, let's go help Tommy, and she's like, no, I'm getting a boat, so I go to Abby. Like that's a terrible decision. Why did you
Right.
decide that? Or continuing to go after Abby and things like that is, I feel like you get to see Joel's sort of one track mind to a certain extent, but then at the end I feel like she pulls back from that. So I'm hoping that while she's developing into Joel, I think there's a cessation of that at the end. Would you agree? Like she pulls back and maybe she won't end up like Joel.
Yeah, because she definitely makes that decision not to kill Abby, which is something we'll have to talk about too.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know if it is that decision is informed because of she kind of realizes what's happening and she doesn't want to become Joel, um, because that part is a bit murkier for me. I'm a bit confused, so take a drink. Um, and then there's also the thematic concern of, well, what does it mean to sort of become Joel? And I think it means to kind of become a monster that we understand. And that
Hmm.
is definitely where Ellie is at the end. She is monstrous in so many ways,
Yeah.
but we understand how we got there, even if we don't entirely sympathize or
Hmm.
empathize.
Do you think it was charted well? Like, could you look back and trace it? And I think about Daenerys Targaryen at the end of Game of Thrones, and people were super upset. And I love her; she's my favorite character. And they just hated what happened. They're like, "How dare you do this?" And then, but if you chart it back, I mean, even though she was doing these good things, she was pretty terrible to the people that she was taking vengeance out on. So there's some history there. But again, this is the third time I'm saying it. We're going from shit, Joel, to this kind of stuff. I felt like there was a bit of a jump to violence. But do you think it was just like a pressure cooker, and of course everything was escalated after Joel died, or do you think it accelerated well, and it was believable that she became this pretty violent person?
It's, hmm, I don't know, because I feel like certainly in that moment where she's being held down and watching Joel get killed, there's that emotion. But I feel like then there's a bit of a time skip where she's had time to mourn, she's quiet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's almost like she could just sort of let that go. And maybe you even feel that as a player, you could, but obviously she has a very complicated relationship with Joel, and that's kind of what all the flashbacks are about.
Yep.
And so I wonder if there's some commentary in terms of like the way that Ellie's world has been structured. Revenge is kind of the only response because there's just not a lot of language to deal with problems like these. And it's, I mean, you also have the element of Tommy, although he's kind of reluctant, I guess, to go out initially. But maybe there is some pressure to take revenge, or else you weren't a good daughter, and you have to sort of resolve these complicated issues inside yourself. And again, this is just Ellie's world, like the thing with Seth that you sort of get hints of throughout the game. You know, Joel's defense of Ellie is always violence, and she doesn't like that. But when it comes time for her to quasi defend Joel or defend his honor, maybe violence is the path that she chooses. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It's odd. I don't know why it wasn't more of a less ambiguous situation, more emotional, being like, okay, now you just get revenge. But it was very complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For me, I just felt like it was rather sudden. Just all these bloodthirsty thoughts that she has,
Yeah,
especially with Dina. Well, there were at least three occasions where Ellie would say something along the lines of, Abby, you better not have been killed by an infected. And, at
right.
one point, Dina would say, well, at least she'd be dead. Wouldn't that be enough? But that's not enough for Ellie. Or even at the end with Santa Barbara, like, it's not enough that Abby were to die. Like, it's got to be by Ellie's hands. And I just wonder, where did this bloodthirst come
Right.
from? It all stemmed from Joel, and I guess we can't really, with trauma, or someone who has lost someone, we can't really see or know how someone's going to react, and so potentially this is just one of those reactions. But you can almost see it right there in that scene where she's held down, and first it's pleading and begging, please don't do this, please don't do this. And then after it happens, she loses it, and saying, I'm gonna fucking kill all of you.
Yeah.
There's one of my F words of the podcast. So you can see that quick change, and she ignores everything around her of, there are people going to bat for her of, don't kill Tommy or this girl. We were just there for Joel, and she ignores all of that. So I
Yeah.
guess you can kind of see that break right there.
And I think that it really reflects the themes of the first game. Well, quite understated in the first game, where there was that kind of equivalence between these different groups. And this is kind of our on ramp to see Ellie as maybe not us anymore, that
Yeah.
she is perhaps growing up, but also just, she's kind of she is that sort of violent, and she would have reactions that are dissimilar from our own in these circumstances. And that's important. Player or avatar and player, disconnect is tricky,
Mm-hmm.
and certainly unique to this medium.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the points I had, was this dissonance between, the decisions that she makes versus you, as the person controlling her. And there were certainly so many moments, I would say so many. There were a few moments where I was forced to just go along with it, and it was
Right.
not what I wanted to do. I think Nora was certainly one of them. The ending was definitely one of them. Just like Jesse, leaving Jesse, and like, these are poor decisions, Ellie. What are you doing right now? And I guess that's part of it, is like, you can't control Ellie like that. This is her path, and you're meant to feel, I think, discomfiture from it as
Hmm.
well.
Right, which is, it's hard because I feel like from a design standpoint, that's got to be a difficult wager or whatever, because you could just say, oh, that's just bad gameplay. Like, I should be
Hmm.
connected with the character all the whole time. And most games are power fantasies where you kind of want to draw the character
Sure.
forward. And in this, it's just, you're telling a more complicated moral story. And so it's like, yeah, I mean, I think they generally did a good job, but uh, going back to gameplay for a moment, like there were a lot of moments in this game where I was like, really? You want me to do this now? Not even like the extreme moments where you're stabbing somebody, but just, there's a lot of moments in this game which are sort of context sensitive, where the controls change for a moment, where you can't run in this segment, or you have to, the way you interact with the world changes, and so there's an unspoken language that the game has to communicate to you, and the ways in which it does that without making everything gamified. There's not a lot of UI in this game. Like it's so tricky, and that all kind of reflects on how you see the character, how you behave with the character. I can imagine that like during testing, you would have the one jerk who like takes the controls and starts spinning around like a dog, and it's just like, oh no, don't do that. Like, you're ruining the image of the
Yeah.
game. But how do you account for all these things?
Mhm.
It's a bit of a head trip.
Yeah, absolutely. The moments when Ellie says something like, we'll do X and then we'll head back, which happen actually frequently, do you feel like she meant them at the time, or was she always lying?
I'm not having a great memory right now. Could you tell me like one
So
specific
one
example?
example would be when Jesse was there, and they're having that conversation after Jesse asks, is Dina pregnant?
Mm,
And he says like, let's go get Tommy and then go back. And she says
mm,
yes. And he like confirms, so we're just getting Tommy, right? And then we're going back, and she's like yes. And it's not the last time that happens either. Do you think in the moment, like, yeah, she's absolutely going to do that, but once she's hit with this fork in the road, because this is when she and Jesse will end up splitting up, that she is going to go off of her on her own? Or do you think she lies to people about like what her intent on the journey is, and it's her journey no matter what, and she'll go along with whatever people say, but if there's a choice, she's going to go on her own?
I feel like even in Left Behind, there was kind of this recurrent theme of Ellie being kind of a jerk, that people kind of tolerate her sometimes. And I feel like maybe it is because she's lying all the time. And obviously her existence now is founded on a lie, which she understands at this point. So yeah, I do get the sense that she's holding a lot back when she's talking to people. And I think that could be part of it for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like when she says those words, she may believe it, but
Mm,
um, it just seems like she's of a singular purpose, that when push
right.
comes to shove, she's going to do her one thing. That's what it seems like anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, even to isolate that line as a motif, or like a leitmotif even, it's interesting because if I could put on my beret, there is no going back. That's you cross a line.
Yeah.
And so if you kind of want to take the super douche film criticism approach, like, just isolating that idea, like, she says this about herself, but this is a one-way trip.
For some people, for
Mm,
sure. I need to turn on a light because it's
yes.
raining. And so that's why it's so dark. And
The
also
contrast.
I've got a quote on my phone, and I don't know where I put my phone. So I'll be right
Okay.
back momentarily.
Now I'm the host of BTO.
That's much. Ay, ay, ay. I was watching it steadily
I know.
decrease in light, and I thought, oh man, we're gonna get in dark, and he's over there with sunny Cali. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so a quote I've been thinking about since the first time I played it, and I don't know. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. So I actually had to go back to the chapter and take a picture of it. So this is after confrontation, the altercation with Dina, where she tells Dina that she's immune. Dina finally believes it, and then Dina also says she's pregnant, and she said she didn't want to be a burden, and then Ellie says, well, you're a burden now, aren't you? So later on, when she leaves, I guess it's day 2, if you check in her journal, this is what her journal says. And there's one line that I want to talk about. What do I do here? How do I? We just started. I shouldn't have said that to her. She's going to treat me different now. I know it. I wish my fucking mask didn't fucking break. That's the line I want to talk about. When did she figure it out she was pregnant? Where were we a couple weeks ago? Boise? I remember her throwing up in Kennewick. This is too much. It all fucking makes sense. The throwing up, how tired she's been. What the fuck, Dina? We have to talk about language here too. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you trust me? But did you trust her? What should I do? It's too late to turn back. Just got to end this whole thing as quickly as possible. So the line that I've been thinking about since I first played this was, I wish my fucking mask didn't fucking break. And so I wonder, can you help me with this? What is her mask? What is she talking about there?
Oh, like metaphorically?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't read in that much into it.
Oh, well, what other mask would there be?
Well, I mean, the literal, her mask breaks, and that's how Dina finds out that she's not infected or that she's immune.
Oh.
Which was such a frightening part because Dina tries to give her the mask, and I'm like, no, 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 no.
Oh,
That was really good.
interesting. See, I didn't read it that way. You might be
Oh,
right. You might be right. Okay. See, I was perceiving it as like, as a person, she's had this mask, this guard up, and so it
right.
broke. And so I wonder, what is this Ellie without the mask and what is it with it? Man, you just destroyed all of that.
I know. I broke your mask.
Yeah, because I was trying to figure out, like, does she feel like she's a really angry and violent person and that she's like Bill almost, and
Right.
so she has to be a happier person? Because again, she doesn't talk about her feelings. Man,
Yeah.
it's
Well,
just
I
her gas mask broke.
I mean, I think there are those at least two layers, and I think that she does try to do a lot to guard her interior, which is a lot like Joel. Um, and I don't think Dina really knows how to get kind of to that other level, which is sad. And it's kind of like how she just drifts apart at the end. But
Hmm.
yeah, what is that interiority for Ellie?
Yeah.
That's definitely worth thinking about.
Hmm. And we see a lot. I mean, the journal, well, I think a question to ask is, how did Ellie change from the first game to this one, in the sense of she was all about talking about her feelings and Joel was
Mm,
not? Uh, a pretty good example would be when she wanted to talk about Sam and all of
mm.
that. And Joel's like, no, they're gone. We're not talking about it. But now she won't talk about it here, with that missable moment with Take On Me. She starts playing Future Days, and Dina comes in the doorway and says, what's that? And she said, oh, nothing. When, like, she could have said something. So is it reasonable that she lost this ability to talk about her feelings? Is, I don't know, is that another symptom of becoming Joel potentially? Is it just the circumstances? Does that make sense that she's now unable to talk about her feelings?
I don't want to read it as a kind of this belief in an inevitability that to survive in a world like this, you have to become closed off because it's quite toxic. So I think we are meant to take it as this is really unfortunate, and yeah, I think it is a symptom of her becoming Joel. And it's also just it's sad to think about that she doesn't have people in her life that she feels like she can be open with, um, and maybe I don't know, like did she have that with Joel? I don't know.
Yeah. Because it seems like Joel may have opened up a bit more, you know,
Yeah,
in this particular one, and then it's like a inverse relationship between the two.
right.
But the way to figure out her feelings is really to read the journal. So you can, which is interesting because I can see that some people would argue, if it was important, why isn't it in the game? It's in this side thing. But I think it makes it that more special. But you also see, because she creates her own songs, you see a lot of poetry in there as well, and it reflects what she's going through. And then, scarily so, all the moth drawings, and then it almost becomes like OCD behavior with how much she's drawing. It like gets worse and worse and worse, which is really interesting. So I feel like it's a great little side thing that they have with the journal. But man, my mask, I can't believe it. It was easy. Sometimes I think too hard on things. Ay,
I
ay,
don't want to
ay.
say that you can't think too deeply, but I mean, I don't know.
It could be, yeah, what her mask would be. Interesting.
Mm.
Um, I did notice as a little point that when she gets punctured by, impaled by that tree, when caught by the rattlers, that I believe it's the same side and a very similar wound to Joel when he falls on the
Oh,
rebar. I don't know if that's on purpose or not. I feel like all things are done purposefully, but
yeah, that would make sense.
yeah. Any other things? I mean, we could talk about her for a while. What else would you like to talk about with Ellie?
Hmm. Well, just as an aside, gameplay wise, she's still a bit underpowered. She can't
Mm,
really do any melee with that little knife, but
yeah.
she certainly can take out clickers, which is much appreciated.
Yes. Without
Um,
having to remake your shivs.
yes, which is just like, it is a video game sometimes and it's very video gamey, but in pretty much just that instance. But yeah, it was nice to offset her against Abby,
Mm-hmm.
just even gameplay wise. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, as a character, I don't know what else there is. I mean, there's a lot, but
Mm-hmm.
my mind
Yeah.
is frozen.
That's okay. Some things I'm reserving also when we compare the two because I think that'll
Right.
be good. But I did like, obviously their size is different, but their abilities to do things like when Abby is running away from the wolves. I mean, she's pushing filing cabinets over, so she's able to do
Yeah.
things on her own that Ellie can't. When you're Ellie, you have to push a garbage can up a, not a can, a
Oh, a
garbage,
dumpster?
yeah, thank you, a dumpster up a little incline and then
Yeah.
run down and pull because you don't have a little companion, so you've got to
Right.
figure it out. But yeah, the melee is certainly not there with her, and that she focuses more on she's got arrows and things. Yeah, so even the
Yep.
weapons I think are catered to both of them, which I would say that I feel like with playthroughs now, not only of Last of Us that I recently did, but with this one I focus more on arrows
Yeah.
than I would have normally, but it helps with the stealth for sure. Shall we move on to Joel? Do you want to do Joel?
And you just have one note here that just says
Well,
unrepentant.
I that's just for my purposes of like, is he unrepentant? I don't know. Well, Joel, Joel overall as a character in this part two, do you see that he's developed? Is he different from the first part? I say, is he unrepentant? I feel like he is. Thoughts on this guy?
I think it's always been very subtle with him from the beginning, and so I don't think he's really had a moment come to Jesus or anything. I think it's just gnawing away at him, which is it's sad to see for a guy who has done such a horrible thing. But all of his instances in this game, I felt were pretty sympathetic.
Mm,
Um, and I think it's just there's something tangible about the ways in which a father tries to reach out to a daughter and failing that I feel like we all kind of understand, even if we aren't in that relationship. And so there is something kind of pathetic or pitiable about him, even after he's gone. And of course, most of what you see of Joel is knowing that he's already gone.
mm-hmm.
And it inevitably reflects back on Ellie. Like whenever he appears, this is how Ellie is remembering him, or there's a specific moment that she is associating with him. So yeah, he's he's not the heart of the story. Well, maybe he is. I don't know, but I don't think he's really changed that much.
Mm. I think he's changed subtly, but it's not. I mean, as the word subtly, it's not in your face, and I think you have to explore Jackson in order to figure it out.
Mm,
Mainly in looking at his house, I think the woodworking. I mean, just the thought of like, what type of person woodworks? What does it take to woodwork? Patience, um, looking at detail, the time making the guitars and things like that, having a space for dummies. So I think there are some character changes to him, but I think yeah, deep down he is the Joel that we've seen. He is unrepentant. He doesn't regret what he did. He said he would do it all over again. That's one of
right.
the quotes there, so we know that for sure. So I guess he's still a monster. Even though it's really hard to say that and look at his bruised face. I feel like it was almost a nail in the coffin having him be the first character you play as, because with the first one you're playing as Sarah, and
Right.
then so it's a nice little, I don't know, cyclical pattern of the first person you play with dies. Hopefully that doesn't happen if there's a part three.
I know. Well, there's also something cyclical where you end Last of Us Part Two walking around a house, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah,
And you do
absolutely.
that a couple times, which is why I thought it was going to keep ending. But um,
Yeah.
The woodworking too. I mean, I didn't really think about that at all until you mentioned it. So, I mean, it's kind of an act of art, and so it's kind of an act of creation. And the project of fatherhood is to foster this new life. And so, is he doing a good job?
Yeah.
Um, was his mission for Ellie to become exactly like him? Would he have regret where she went? All food for thought.
Yeah.
Academic at this point because he
Which
did.
God, DED. Which brings up a good question. Tommy, at one point, this might actually be under Tommy, but I think it applies here. He says, what was it? Oh, that Joel wouldn't go after them if it had happened to Ellie or Tommy. And
Hmm.
Ellie says, that's not true, that he would absolutely have gone after the WLF. What do you think? Do you think
I
he?
think Yeah, I think Ellie's right. And I think Tommy was just kind of saying that to discourage her because it is strange. I mean, you do have kind of a sense of honor, even as a bad guy, even as a smuggler. There are just, you create a world and you create the laws for that world that you follow. And this is a lawless post-apocalyptic America. And so at some point, you do have to kind of lay down your principles, and I think that is one that would appeal to him, especially because it has to do with violence.
Yeah. Do you feel like these sweet moments that we see between him and Ellie, we don't see it, but we know that he teaches her how to play guitar. We don't see it, but we know that he teaches her how to swim. And then, of course, the zoo moment, of the museum moment. Are these moments that are purely out of love, or do you think there's a tinge of like trying to make it up to her as well of what he took from her?
I mean, I think this is all stuff that he would have done with his actual daughter, and so you could certainly read some sort of like absolution in them. I was also just now thinking that there might have been even something a bit coercive in each of them,
Hmm.
because he doesn't tell her where they're going when they go to the museum, and he pushes her into the water and things like that. And with the guitar, like he's really coming on strong. He's like, "You're going to learn the guitar," but you being as gentle as he can, but she doesn't really. She's not into it. And so I think there's more themes of like choice and agency. But those moments do end up being really sweet, and I think Ellie appreciates them, especially in the astronaut segment. And so, yeah, I mean, um, it's just like the sweeter it gets, the more sort of bittersweet it becomes. So it's very effective. So
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like, to go back to something you said, I think that he wouldn't want to see Ellie become as violent as she did. Just like what I imagine a father would want for his daughter. Um, yeah, I don't know if he would have stopped her on the quest though. If he, as ghostly Joel, came back, would he say, "It's okay, it's okay, kiddo.
yeah,
Don't come back"? Yeah, I'm not sure. So I recently read an article, and I sent it to you, of course, that said, so it was mostly a critical article, I suppose, on this, that said Ellie is a victim of the paternal gaze. So I feel
I
like
never
this.
heard that term before.
Are you being sarcastic?
No, I really have
Okay,
paternal
because I
gaze.
hadn't
Never.
either. I was like, oh, I guess that's true, because women's gaze and man's gaze, all that. Yeah, paternal gaze. Just that it's she as well as Abby are, I mean, they lose agency because it's all about their dads, basically. Their
Right.
story revolves around. Would you agree with this? Do you feel like that is a huge part of the story, that she is a victim to the paternal gaze, Ellie?
I mean, if you want to draw an equivalence to how this conversation usually goes, where it's the woman in refrigerators, we don't really say that the guy is sort of acting as an agent of the dead girlfriend.
Sure, it's
So
true.
it's interesting.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I feel like they express a lot of agency, and part of it is the moral ambiguity or an interrogation of should they even be doing this, and
Hmm.
so there isn't that sort of automatic approval of what they're doing.
Yeah. And I mean, even though we have all those flashbacks, it's not like she's stopping and in her journal, or she's even musing, like, what would Joel do in this situation? Like, it's
Right.
all Ellie. It's all Ellie
Yeah.
making those decisions, however
Hmm.
right or wrong they may be. So I feel like while the journey itself might be under the blanket of revenge for my father, everything else after that, I feel like, is Ellie doing what she does. Ugh.
I think there's still merit to that idea, though, that this is a story about fathers and daughters, and it's hard not to make that kind of regressive in a sense. But again, like, is The Last of Us Part Two supposed to be this bastion of feminism, or is it telling a specific story? And I don't know what the messaging was around it. I think a lot of people read a lot more liberalness into Naughty Dog. I mean, I even said that they were bleeding hearts earlier, which is true, and so maybe that's kind of where the expectation comes from. Um, but I don't think you can really tell a father-daughter story without it being kind of a bit feeling retro, which, you know, is the price you pay, I guess.
Yeah. There was a comparison made to BioShock. Is it Infinite
Yeah,
in that article? Do you feel like there are any similarities there, or do you feel like this one's more well developed than that one?
I would say that this is a lot more well developed.
Okay.
And I was actually going to bring up Infinite later as well when we talk about Abby and Ellie, or specifically the Seraphites and the Bulls.
Yeah.
But yeah, the father-daughter stuff in that game is a bit murky.
Okay.
And I guess it's technically a spoiler to say that they are father and daughter, but yes, that is a relationship. But I mean, in this
It's
one,
years old, isn't it?
yeah, well, it came out the year that the first Last of Us came out, so
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Okay. Any other things on Joel?
Um, Maybe they could do a DLC and it'll be Joel's story. I don't know.
Maybe. I wonder what that would be like.
More shivs.
More shivs, I guess. Yeah. And you can bare knuckle it like Abby. I mean,
Yes.
Donovan should play this game alone just to play as Abby, because he
Yeah.
can beat everyone to a pulp like he does in general. A tragic character, I would say, perhaps one of the most of this, which is interesting. You'd think it'd be Ellie, but Tommy.
Yeah.
He certainly underwent a great change. I call it a decline, though it didn't seem gradual. But is it understandable, sort of, how his character fell from this guy who's normally optimistic and upbeat, I would say, trying to get, Joel and Ellie back together and loving his wife and joking about things and getting her a diamond from some shop in Seattle, to now he's got a limp. He lost an eye, which frankly I'm really surprised he didn't die. I don't know how
Yeah.
that happened, but I guess we should be happy he's alive.
Yep.
And then, just like you promised me that you were going to take her out and leave that map there, I can't do it, so that means you have to do it, kind of thing. Oh man. Yeah, thoughts on Tommy in this, and does it make sense?
I mean, I think part of the power is that you don't really see the transformation, that he appears and he he appears familiar in that final scene, and then there's just this turn where it's like, oh, he has this new energy about him.
Mm-hmm.
And you can tell that he's lost a certain essential part of him, because even in the first game he was always kind of this light mirror to Joel. And when they would talk about Boston and how, you know, they gave me nightmares, and you know, he seems so stable and so level-headed. And then to see, you know, even throughout the course of the game, when he's in flashbacks and he's teaching Ellie how to shoot zombies from afar,
Yeah.
and things like that, like he's a very comfortable archetype, as like that kind of dad character. And then to see become a very specific other kind of archetype, it was kind of harrowing for me. That was
Mm-hmm.
actually like really one of the most powerful moments for me. That suggested so much and left a lot of dark implications. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think it was his maiming that was the reason why, or do you think it was Jesse? Because he was fine. I mean, up to that moment, they're like, "We're gonna go. This is the second time that Ellie said sure, but she didn't mean it." And he's like, "That means leaving her alive. Are you okay with that?" And Ellie's like, So he was okay leaving Abby alive. So what do you think it was that was like the catalyst that started this change?
I mean, I don't want to say that it was just him being injured, because it's not quite as poetic as, like, maybe if we point to the scene where we're actually fighting against him and he's the sniper, that like his experiences at that point were kind of hardening him over time. But I mean, I think probably, yeah, it was him losing an eye, because I think that would harden anybody.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's a bit of a troubling aspect of that narrative, because it's kind of like, it plays into the death wish sort of like everybody's a liberal until something happens. Like, you know, he just never had a hard day in his life, and now look at him. So I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah. It's huge the fact that I mean, him and Maria are taking a break, I think, because
Yeah,
they have gone through so much. You know, she's
yeah,
gotten annoyed at him in the first game, in this game, and to have that happen, you're like, wow, there must have been something there. Do you feel like he's selfish bringing all of that information to Ellie, and clearly Ellie's got to do the job because he can't do it, and he leaves that map there, which is terrible. It's like Batman leaving the playing card and the Killing Joke on Oracle's
yeah.
bed. But yeah, ooh, what do you think about that moment?
I mean, I think it's very true to human behavior, honestly, and it's consistent with a lot of the selfishness that happens. And it also just speaks to the ways in which revenge is kind of like a virus, and you spread it around, you spread your guilt around, and you feel suddenly like you just have to alleviate it. And certainly Ellie feels the same way too. So yeah, all sorts of, again, shades of one another.
Do you think she would have gone out had he not been there and brought that stuff to there and had that information?
Maybe not right away, but I think something would have eventually reminded her of just too many PTSD flashbacks, which, you know, scientifically are not solved by revenge, but I understand why you would feel they would be.
Yeah. Someone didn't tell Batman. Uh, any other thoughts on Tommy?
I don't know. For some reason, he was always kind of a standout character just by being so minor
Yeah.
in both of these games. But I always really liked him, so it was quite sad to see where he ends up.
Yeah. I guess he lies a bit too at the beginning because he is trying to get Ellie to stay and then he goes off and sends
Right,
some sort of note that I thought I could get over it, but I couldn't. I thought, wow, he really played it well, trying to convince Ellie not to go. So that was interesting.
do
Yeah.
you think he meant it at first?
I think, yeah, probably similar to Ellie. I think believing those words and then maybe it just got too hard for him somehow.
Yeah,
um, because I was surprised, honestly, that he wasn't more for the Venge quest in the beginning because it's his brother. But perhaps he understood the world more and like understood that, you know, Joel has done things and this is it.
right,
And maybe he saw. I can't remember if he was knocked out, because I know they hit him. They pistol whipped him, but perhaps he saw, you know, some of the ex Fireflies saying, you know, no, it's just Joel that we're after, that sort of thing.
right.
But he clearly, I mean, he thinks holistically, which I think is different from Ellie, at least in the beginning, that what is the effect of what you're thinking about doing? What would, number one, the group, you're going into a big question mark unknown, you have no idea. And then also with Jackson, you could be bringing back problems. So I feel like he senses the cycle that it could continue. But he goes off and does it, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, he really is a man torn between these different aspects.
Yeah.
He's got this society that's been really successful,
Mm-hmm.
and there's just such a tremendous sense of obstacle of going out into the world and looking for somebody when you can't be out there.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the opening act of the game really does a lot to characterize the world beyond, which we're already familiar with, of course, but it's just like there is now a sense of home that we didn't have before. That once you go out there, you know, it's just like you don't know how many stalkers you're gonna run into.
Yeah, very true. And now we have hordes. We forgot to talk about the
Yeah,
hordes.
my
That was so
gosh.
horrifying because you encounter them as Abby, and I thought, no, not this, not this. And then I guess that was really the only one you had, wasn't it?
Yeah, which was surprising. I
Yeah,
thought that would be more of a recurrent element.
yeah. They were at least
Uh,
talked about. Tommy was talking about migration patterns or something.
yeah. But that moment, I really like that part with Abby and the Horde. And there were a few moments of this game where it was very much kind of more on rails, kind of those moments in Tomb Raider where you just have to run.
Yeah.
Like the car chase scene is nothing like that in the first game. And then the horse escape from the island, very
Yep.
intense set pieces.
Very much so. Yep. The other thing about Tommy is, of course, he agrees with Joel's decision because once they get back to Jackson proper, he says, "I can't say I would have done any different in terms of Ellie there." So, thought that was interesting.
Not a father
Um,
though, but he still gets it.
yeah. Jesse, we'll move on to Jesse. May he rest in peace. Seems like a leader, a capable leader. I couldn't really put a finger on an age because I feel like he is older than Dina and
Yeah.
Ellie, but I could be wrong. But it seems like he has lots of responsibilities for as young as he is, and he sneaks off after them and helps out. And unfortunately, and he's a moral compass, so it's like The Walking Dead where the moral characters always get killed. He is certainly the ones, because he's the one who wants to go after Tommy, and that is the right decision. Like, we need to help out our family instead of whatever this weird venge quest is you've got going.
Mm.
But unfortunately he did not make it. Thoughts on this guy? Did you like that he joined the journey in Seattle? How did his death affect you, if at all?
So I think I saw some criticism leveled against the game because supporting characters like Jesse were not quite as fleshed out. But I mean that he is very much a supporting character. He's functional in the narrative, and for what extra he does bring, I thought was a good garnish. I was happy to see him in Seattle, and I feel like he's interesting because he's a very easygoing character, which is kind of rare for people in The Last of Us. Like, um, Ellie, moves on his girl, and he makes a joke about it, but seems like he's pretty much moved on, and so he's a bit conflicted about having a baby with Dina. He asks all these questions, but he's very reticent to get answers. It seems. So he's an interesting character, but understated, I think purposely so. And then when he dies, I think I was certainly a bit affected, but I think what's strikes me the most about his death, Manny's death, is that they're just so sudden,
Yeah.
and they happen with almost no ceremony, which we can talk about as we go on. But
Yeah.
it's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I like him. I mean, the scenes with him, I think, are fun.
Yeah.
In Jackson, and it's the cliche of they're talking about two different things, and so Ellie's the one who outs herself, I suppose, pun intended, outs herself with that, and he's like, "What?" And yeah, jokes are made. And then he adds some levity, and it's nice to have a companion character because I think we're still hoping that Ellie will sort of snap out of it and be like more heroic. But once you're on your own, that's when the bad stuff happens. So
Yeah.
it's good to have him. And then just, yeah, some of those, I think one of the best written scenes was certainly between them. And, he says something like, a good friend is someone to tell you to get out of your own way, something like that. And that, then unfortunately he died. I just wasn't expecting it. So like once he gets shot right away, it was really sad. And to know that his parents lost him, of course, and had a grandbaby, because you read an artifact back at the farmhouse and see that, this is not your fault. So clearly that's affecting Dina, is really interesting. But yeah, so as a minor character, I felt like he was pretty fleshed out as like a decent guy, and someone who had, I think, a good sense of morality and ethics. And you're right, the shocking, because you burst through the door and he's just laid low right away, was rather shocking.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of do that when you don't have a character arc, and he
Yeah.
doesn't have a character arc, so you don't get a sense for like, oh, he could die
Yeah.
now. You never really think that because it could be any time, and indeed it was.
Yeah. I think that was probably when I was thinking that no character was safe.
Yeah.
And there are memes with George R. R. Martin, where it says like, "What's your favorite character?" And he's like scribbling it down or whatever, like Game of Thrones. No one's safe. You might as well not like it. So once he died, I thought, yikes, it could really be anyone.
Hmm.
So then I tried to not get attached, but that's impossible for sure. Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, hopefully he's someone that I thought, did they bury him? And I feel like they had the time to. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping they did. But you would also, could they have brought his body back to Jackson potentially if they wrapped him up?
Right.
I don't know, but that would have been a month at least
Right. They
walking
could have
back.
just
Because I was
buried
thinking
him.
about that. They didn't have a horse. All their horses were killed.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So I don't know how they got
Gosh.
back. But there's the DLC, the walk back to Jackson.
Yeah.
Man alive. Which is actually terrible, though, if you think about it, because you are just thinking constantly about what happened. So no wonder they're probably stewing on it, right? Because I was shocked to hear when Tommy came to visit that Ellie said right when they returned to Jackson that she was going to pay, that Abby was going to pay. Because I thought clearly at the end of that theater episode that she was good. She wasn't going to go after her again. But I guess if you're walking for several days and stewing on everything that happened, that probably there'd be a resurgence of everything.
Yep.
Gosh. And then we get to Dina, who's the last of our Jackson crew, I guess I'll call them. So yeah, everyone thought Dina was gonna kick the bucket. But no barrier gaze trope here. And she's your companion for the first day, but then of course she's pregnant and can't really help you, but she still helps you out, so she's not completely unuseful. But what do you think about Dina?
I really like Dina. I don't know if there's necessarily a character arc with her either. She might be the most major character who doesn't really have that much. I think she also exists as kind of a moral compass, and definitely a reminder of the world that Ellie could choose easily, if only she sort of, which I think is why it's important that she kind of diverges from the mission. And I didn't see her going kind of all the way, not that whether or not she was going to die or whatever. So it was interesting the way she was sidelined, and that it became kind of a plot point, I guess. Yeah, I mean, it was cool. It was nice to have another female character for her to talk to.
Yep. And I guess it passes the Bechdel test.
Right.
I mean, they do talk about Jesse at times, but they have way more of the conversations than that. But yeah, that whole scene in the open world area was great. Just them talking about their history. They talk about the first man that they killed. When you go into the synagogue, having those conversations were great. So yeah, it was again adds levity, I think, to what is going to become very intense. And it shocked me, to be honest, because I thought, oh boy, this is going to be really, really bad and dour now. Yeah. And it was lighter than I expected. And I think Dina was potentially part of that reason. But yeah, I was just worried she was going to get killed at any moment. I was so nervous. I thought, no, Dina, go home, Dina.
That's exactly what I think. Said that exactly. But I think there's also something to the way in which how the game sort of works. You're solving puzzles with this character, and there's a point where you boost her over a wall, and she's just on the other side, and now you're separated, and you just get that anxiety of like, watch out for clickers, I can't do anything. And so it's the game sort of pushes you together in moments like that, which I think are more effective than some of the character work. Like I didn't get too into Left Behind because I feel like they introduced Riley with a cutscene, and the game writing is so good, but it didn't quite get me there where I felt differently about Dina.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like if Dina weren't pregnant, that the Mel death / murder wouldn't have been as powerful as it was, or do you think Ellie would have felt that no matter what?
I think it's true that it wouldn't be as powerful, which is just kind of the weird logic of storytelling, because you kill a pregnant woman, like you don't need to be reminded of your own pregnant woman to be like, how horrible. But in a story, you kind of do. Like, that's just how stories work. Yeah, well, I thought you were just going to say, like, if she wasn't pregnant, like, would she have been a better character or something? And I do appreciate that everybody is kind of they're a match for the world, including Dina. And so when she becomes pregnant, it's not like, oh my God, pregnant. So women so weak, because we know that she's not. So
yeah,
it didn't bother me. Like it might have in a different game even.
Yeah. And I mean, she was about to go out day 2, Seattle, but then
I know
Ellie stops her. So she certainly does push on. Oh gosh. And then of course we have the ending with her. We have two. We have a false ending at the farm, and then a real ending. Oh boy. Well, you and I both, I think, wanted the game to end at farm number 1. And it seems like she's got everything. I mean, they talked about this in Seattle, that she wants a nice farm away from Jackson, got some sheep, everything, and they would be together. And so they have that. And unfortunately, Ellie decides to not keep with that. Dina at one point says, "I'm not going to do this again," I think.
Right.
I think that's the quote. And I wondered what your take on that was. Like, what is the this? Because I've been
Right.
spending a while thinking about that.
Yeah, I immediately detected there was a double meaning there, and I think that it was kind of in reference to just a relationship like this.
Mm,
And certainly, literally, it's like I don't want to go out there again and
yeah.
fight clickers, but and it makes you wonder if it's a reference to how Ellie was before, or even somebody like Jesse just want to have a complicated relationship like that. I don't know. What did you think?
Yeah. Or waiting at home, kind of like she was
Right.
waiting in the theater, wondering if Ellie was going to
Oh,
return,
that's
that sort of
true.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the relationship one also makes sense. It just is like one that I don't want to think about. Just my hopes. I mean, we'll talk about the ending, but my hope is like maybe they'll reconnect. I don't know, but
Could happen.
Ellie did make some poor decisions there. But motherhood seems to have sat well with Dina. I mean, she's seen even Ellie, frankly, in that whole thing. They seem like good parents, and it seems like a loving
Yeah.
family.
Too loving. This is too good. It must be ruined somehow.
Oh man, I so hoped that was the end, and then Tommy comes. Man,
Yep.
darn you, Tommy. Any other thoughts on Dina?
Not for now. I think when we talk about the farm endings, we'll
Okay,
kind of circle back.
come back. So then we're going to go to our Wolves and the Salt Lake crew as well, and we'll start with our other protagonist, Abby. I feel like we've already covered this. Was it successful playing as her? I think both of us say that it was.
For me, eventually.
Okay, just not at the beginning. I would agree, like because it feels uncomfortable in the beginning. But I think
Yeah.
once you meet up, for me, once you meet up with Yara and Lev, that's when things start to transition.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I wonder if I can't imagine Neil Druckmann not understanding that this would cause issues. Maybe he just didn't know the extent, but he probably knew going in like this is going to be rough. Some people playing as Abby. I wonder if they'll like it.
I think he did. I don't know if it was him, but somebody on Naughty Dog did reference Metal Gear Solid 2, which is sort of the famous
Mm,
like quasi troll, where
yeah.
you want to play as the guy from the first game, but you're playing this effete boy ninja,
Who's naked, isn't he?
who is naked. Yes, one of Donovan's favorite games, maybe for that reason. And so in this one, it's weird because Joel and Abby are not that dissimilar. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
body in terms of their physicality, they can do all the same things. But is it really just that she's a lady? And I guess that she killed Joel. But it's like, geez, come on. It's like a story. Like you gotta there's a certain buy-in where you say, oh, I don't know, we already covered that, I guess. But oh, it's so frustrating.
Yeah. Well, I guess it was just the avenue that they heard it that they were already disinclined to
Right.
get on board. So we were lucky. We were one of the lucky few.
Do you think that you would have been more negative if you had gotten the leaks?
Yeah.
Like, oh my Jolie.
I think had it been, honestly, I think I just tend towards like the female characters. So while I really like Joel, I think I probably would have been more hurt, like had Ellie done something. I don't know. I think I would have been really upset that I was spoiled. I think that would be the first thing.
Yeah.
Um, and then maybe like quizzical of like, why am I playing as this other character? What would be the point of it? But I would hope to have an open mind. But that's why I stay away from things. And, because reviews are all negative and I generally sway the other way. Like people don't like Suicide Squad. I like Suicide Squad. My favorite Batman, it's Batman and Robin. So I think I think I would have been fine, hopefully, but probably just more upset that I just got spoiled by someone.
Right.
So
Very upset.
yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about her body. Um, so as
Ooh.
said, I know, as said, she's got a bodybuilder physique. One of the rat whores called her built like an ox, I think. Or maybe that was what Tommy's information got him. But the rat whore guy's like, she's got arms like me. Um, but I feel like there's it's not just let's create this interesting character that's really buff. I feel like her being buff is a huge story point. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's it is a way to sort of reflect on the outside what's going on the inside, and she's just somebody who's very, very focused. She is super dealt into the wolf ideology, although certainly she harbors a lot of nostalgia for her Firefly glory
Yeah.
days. But she's somebody who threw herself into like the work and the militant aspect after her father died. Like that's how she coped with it. Because it's shocking to see her in flashbacks and she's not massively muscled. And she's also like 14. Like, how old is Abby supposed to be?
See, I feel like Abby is slightly older than Ellie, but
Yeah.
I could be wrong. I mean, I feel like Neil said they were the same age, but she looks
Oh,
like she's a bit older to me. I feel like she's
I mean,
21 in the present day.
which is shocking because even in the trailers, I was like, I saw like a 30-year-old person. Like, I don't know,
That's
it was
true, yeah.
crazy. But
That's
whatever.
what the steroids do to you kids.
I guess so.
Yeah, I
But
feel like, do you want to keep
I
going?
don't know.
Okay. Yeah, so buying into that ideology, absolutely. I feel like also reflecting her single-minded purpose of getting revenge at that point in
Hmm.
time. Like, I'm gonna hone my body so that when I find Joel, like I'll be ready to go. Because we see her focus on training at all times. I mean, when she's with Owen and having that sweet moment when they first find the aquarium, she keeps talking about when are we going to have training? When are we going to have training? And I also feel like, and it's good that we saw the gym, so we know that there is a gym there when you first see it. I feel like it's also a way to control, like if I'm able to be strong like this, maybe I won't be governed by or a slave to my acrophobia, because
Oh,
that's a
okay.
huge thing to her too. Like that's a weakness potentially. So maybe this is a way to overcome it, or yeah. But yeah, I
And
think
the loss of her father is also a moment of intense, the loss of agency as well. So,
absolutely.
and it's also worth saying that the body, while even shocking to me, the first thing anybody ever learns about me is that I really like muscle ladies, but it was even like, I was like, wow, I've never seen anybody like that in a game, but it's not a real unrealistic body. It is not even a bodybuilder's physique because she's not that toned. She's just
Yeah.
she's big. But I actually just saw a person who looked exactly like that on an upcoming TV show on CBS called Tough as Nails, which is some dumb like game show or whatever. But yes, if you watch that show, you will see an Abby like person.
Okay, there you go. And I think her body shape lends itself really well because when she is 14 or 6, I feel like she's 16 in those flashbacks, but when she's young Abby, like she kind of has a rectangular thing, so it
Mhm.
seems like her body lends itself well to that for sure. Something I noticed, especially I think even more in my second playthrough, is her reputation among the wolves.
Mhm.
Like everyone knows who Abby is. Why do you think they know her? Is it because she's a huge woman? Is she intimidating to them? Do they like her? What is it about her that makes her well known? And I feel like beyond story purposes, that of course they're all gonna know, but it seems like everyone knows who Abby is.
I mean, I wonder if there's a bit of like cronyism where it's like
Oh,
because she was the daughter of the guy. Although I guess the wolves are different from the fireflies, but she has a story, and she does strike me as somebody who's like you would say, oh, once you get to know her, because she does have a kind of a tough exterior,
yeah.
but she's actually really quite like kind and patient, like remarkably patient,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is really interesting and kind of an underrated quality for a character generally.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, it when she's walking around the base, yeah, you definitely do feel like you are inhabiting a world in part because people know you and they talk
Yeah.
about you, which is really cool.
Yep. And it's heightened even more when you're on the island and
Mm-hmm.
they find her. And then when you're in any of these altercations afterwards with the wolf, they're like, it's Abby and she's with a
Yeah,
scar. It's like, yikes. Or at
right.
the
The last person,
hospital.
yeah,
Yeah. When there are two people talking about Owen, what Owen did to Danny, and Abby
yep,
walks up and they're like, oh, Abby.
yeah.
Yeah, so it's just interesting. So yeah, I can get on board with all that. We do know that she's Isaac's top scar killer, I think
Right.
is the title that Mel gives her. So there's that as well. But yeah, it seems like everyone knows her. But I agree with you that she might have, as some people term, a resting bitch face.
Right.
But yeah, she's kind. I mean, she has a terrible sense of humor. Like when she sees that painting of dogs playing cards, she says to Lev, did you know our dogs used to be able to play cards? And Lev said, I'm 13, not 8. Do other people think you're funny? Which is like, oh, well, there you go. She tried, but that did not work out for
Yep,
her. So,
she is
yeah.
not slick. I mean, well, especially when she's picking up quarters, like the thing that I kept thinking was
Yeah.
like, gosh, she's such a nerd.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of lends to her like being a super good soldier because she's just like so focused that like even Owen, who has kind of a free spirit, like they're just so different.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. And you would think that Owen would lend himself, which we'll talk about him after this, to opening her up and you can get more of Abby, but it's hard. It's hard to. I mean,
Yeah.
it's almost the opposite effect of, you know, that this is what she's not. Though at the end, I feel like that may change.
Mhm.
Here's a quote. I don't think it's like the mask quote, so we can talk about this a bit more. But Mel, there's a confrontation with Mel. I keep using this word, so thank you for reminding me what it is. And this is after Yara's amputation, and Owen wants to go to Santa Barbara, and Mel's gonna go, but she says she won't go if Abby is there.
Right.
She thinks Abby with the kids is an act. She doesn't believe that Isaac's top scar killer, as she says, had a change of heart. She thinks it has to do with Owen, which maybe there's a scene, well, which we are going to talk about, which seems weird that we're going to talk about, but I think we need to talk about it, where Abby actually has sex with Owen, even though Owen's with Mel. So maybe she knows, but she says, here's a quote, she says, "You're a piece of shit, Abby, you always have been." And this confused me a bit, if only because I feel like Mel is more of that than Abby is. Is it just like heat of the moment? Do you feel like Abby is that? Abby is a piece of shit character. But I just think about Mel, she didn't want loose ends back at the cabin. I don't know. And even at the end, Abby, I feel like she's not a good person, but she's not what Mel says. At least for me,
Yeah.
I mean, she even sacrifices her desires for Mel. I mean, she just says, "Owen, get your priorities straight," in order to tell Mel that she won't be coming to Santa Barbara. But what do you think about this? Do you agree with Mel?
I mean, I wonder what that moment is supposed to sort of tie back to. Is it supposed to play into our simmering resentment that she killed Joel? Because um, she really demonstrates in that scene a very honorable sense of justice. I mean, she lets Tommy and Ellie go because she's just there for Joel.
Yeah.
And so basically, like nothing in evidence of her character leads you to that moment with Mel where she calls you a piece of shit. And it kind of felt, I mean, I had a similar reaction where it was just like, what? And it kind of feels like a moment that like movie characters are just called because this is like a gritty world. It's like, oh man, you're such a piece of shit. But it's actually, you're okay. So it was weird.
Yeah.
But I think that moment, because I initially, I didn't like that there was even a question of like, you know, how are you with kids? Because there's been nothing to really bring you to that moment. So I think it's more about setting a goalpost or whatever you call it to measure Abby against. Like she starts at it. This is so unthinkable for her. Is it possible?
I see.
Rather than as a reflection.
Okay. So Mel kind of has a picture of Abby, and so
Mhm.
it's she can't really see her being any other way.
Yeah, and I guess I can understand where that picture would come from because again, Abby is so focused on what she does, and
Yeah.
she's this tough soldier person, and so it's kind of sad that people have limited perceptions of each other, ostensibly of their friends, even.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see it in the terms of clearly Abby has lost relationships, I think, with her single-minded goals. So similar
Right.
to Ellie, which will, of course, we'll get into that comparison. She's lost Owen, but I just think about, you know, the cab, like Mel, I feel like is calling the pot black or the kettle
Right.
black, whichever one it is, because Mel signed up for it. The only person who was coerced to go there was basically Owen.
Yeah.
So Mel was there. She didn't want loose ends. I mean, she was all a party to that. She's killed scars. Though Manny is there to tell us, you know, but it affects her differently because she's not a soldier there. But I
Hmm.
just, yeah, I found it interesting that whole scene played out, and that hurts Abby because then you see Abby cry for the first time, and
Yeah.
Yara at least is there and says, I don't think that, yeah, I think you're a good person. Um, so then we'll connect because the key question then is why? Why does she help Lev and Yara? And it's asked like 3 times, I think. And she helps to the extent of killing her own people, the wolves. So just be aware of that. Let's see. Trying to think of what my notes are saying. What could help them? Oh, okay. So she thinks about them when they're apart. So she actually says Lev could have helped when they were in the hospital. Later on, when she has the stuff, she says, I hope Yara's okay. First time she says that she did it for me to Yara. Later to Yara, she says, you don't deserve this and I needed this. Then, of course, you've got you're my people to Lev later on, all of that stuff. And it just continues to grow and grow and grow. I'm sure we'll talk a lot about Lev because he was certainly, I think, my favorite character. But yeah, why initially does she help? Do those motivations change? Does it show a change in her as a character holistically?
I mean, I think it does change throughout, which is difficult to reconcile a bit. And you're gonna have to help me out with this. The initial motivation, because they have the flashback or the dream sequence, I guess. Like this game is, they actually have a dream scene.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
She goes into the hospital and she opens the door and she finds, well, I don't remember what she finds, but it's like a Seraphite scene. And so she's like, oh, I got to go back for those kids. And
I think Yara and Lev are hanging per the Seraphite. Yeah.
And so, like, what do you think that was about? Because I mean, I think that was sort of the textual representation of the motivation, but what do you make of that?
Yeah. And that was after the sex scene, I think, too.
Yep, right after.
Because I think she wakes up and Owen, she's in Owen's arms. My gosh. Yeah. I feel like there's I mean, to have something break in subconsciously is obviously there's something there already beneath the surface. And even when she leaves them in that trailer, she tells Lev, this place is patrolled. You need to get out early. So even as she was leaving, there's some care there. So I think while initially she helped them, maybe because they're number one, she owes them. So soldier, life for a life kind of thing, or you got me. I feel like this is also maybe Japanese samurai culture too, maybe. I owe my life to you. Potentially it's probably somewhere else. She wants to pay that back, but along the way, yeah, man, I wonder what it, because I think it's very complicated. I don't know if there's one answer for this. So I think she does owe them for sure. I think she is trying to make up for something, though I can't really figure out what it is. Is it the death toll that she has paid upon the Seraphites? But I think it starts to transition to genuine care, and then an understanding that this relationship between the wolves and the Seraphites it's way more complicated than it actually should be, and there are people, and yeah, Owen probably has a part to play in that with his story of the Seraphite, because that was like the last thing he talked about before they had sex and she fell asleep, so that could have also been a reason why that was there. But I think it is complicated. I think because her answer keeps changing, so maybe she can't figure it out either. But I don't distrust her motives at all, like Mel does. I feel like there is she would not go through all of that stuff if she were just playing around.
Right. So it's interesting there because there's what you have to kind of piece together as the player, that like, of course, having that cognitive dissonance of, oh, actually the enemy is not quite the enemy that I thought, how that would change a person. Is there something more universally human poking through, which would be a really cool aspect of the thematic framework, where you have all of these proper nouns going to war, but it's like what Abby sort of has in that moment is more natural. It's empathy and things like that, and that's what drives her. And what strikes me about the initial motivation with that dream is that it begins with the recollection of the hospital, and so there's a connection there between her father's death and these kids, which is just interesting. And I don't know how to make sense of that other than like, does she finally want something? Does she finally want to control something? Because she went after Joel for so long. Like maybe this is just how she operates. She just has these missions that sort of come up. I don't know.
Yeah, or a purpose. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, like you said, yeah, mission. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what the connection would be necessarily with them, except, if they were of similar age as her and, what is that like? Because I think the story would have been really different if had been adults.
Yeah.
But the fact that she is there watching Yara's arm get shattered,
Yep.
and it's 16-year-old or however old Yara is, and then Lev. Um, yeah. Aye. It's rough, but it's yeah, I feel like if we're all on board, and one of the reasons why we love Last of Us Part 1, I guess we have to call it that now, is this burgeoning relationship and closeness between Joel and Ellie, then I feel like for me, this one, it's Abby and Lev.
Yeah.
And watching
Absolutely.
these two people with very dissimilar views, ideologies come together and then bond and have, yeah. I saw someone talk about it as like a sisterly relationship. Do you think it's more that, or do you think it's maternal? Because you had mentioned maternal before. And I had thought maternal too until I read this article. And then I was just thinking, oh, is it more sisterly? I don't know.
Hmm. Wait, between Abby and Yara?
Lev, sorry, did I say Yara?
No, but sisterly. I don't know. That's kind of it was
Big
that would be
sister,
good.
oh, younger brother.
Oh, I see. Um, yeah, I could see that because certainly Abby would not be old enough to be Lev's parent.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know if movies and media have always been great about differentiating, sibling relationships versus parent-child relationships. But
Yeah.
and so what does it sort of mean? And like like I guess what would be the distinction for you?
Yeah, that's hard for me just because I think about, my favorite comic character, of course, is Barbara Gordon. And I
Hmm.
feel like she has a maternal relationship with the other Batgirls. And I feel like that's potentially because of the legacy, like she's teaching them something. Whereas I think she's more in a sisterly relationship with the other members of the Bat family that have been around a while. Um, so I don't know if it's like life experience or what is the role. Yeah, I don't know, because I would fall with even though she's not literally a mother, I would say that I would tend towards a maternal relationship with
Yeah,
Lev.
I think so too.
Yeah.
And just speaking to the whole relationship, I mean, it's just um, you have these two characters who are from societies that were sort of like Lev was born into it. Abby is a wolf by necessity because the Fireflies don't exist anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and now they get an opportunity to create their own society. And like that's a maybe it's an obvious story, but I think it's always a very powerful one.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it's handled here is really great, and it speaks to the theme of hate. Like this ultimately is a game, sure, about hate, but like um, the forces that might counteract that and stand in opposition to it, and that's what Abby represents when it
Yeah.
comes to that relationship.
Yeah. And there's such quick buy-in for Abby too once she finds out, who Lev was, which I think
Mm,
is really great as well. And there's a moment after she hears Lev's dead name, and then Lev asks, "Did you hear what they called me?" And Abby says, "Yeah." And Lev says, "You want to ask about it?" And Abby says, "You want me to ask you about it?" And so there's such care there, and going back to our present is their history. She's teaching Lev all of these different things as well, either cool, whereas Lev used cold. That's cold.
yeah.
So that's why I feel like it's, yeah, more maternal. And even, one of, gosh, that scene at the end with the pillars, and that
Hmm.
even though Ellie's right there threatening, basically she could kill you at any moment, Abby makes a beeline for Lev and gets him down, which I think is great. And that's her one like singular focus at that point is to protect Lev.
Yeah. Gosh. That, I mean,
Whew.
that is just the best part of the game. It's just that relationship.
Sure.
It's really, really powerful.
Absolutely, yeah. Which you wouldn't have thought, right? And the people who hated, they'd
Yeah.
never get to experience it. They're like, I
I
hate Abby. I'll never play this game. Well, you'll never get to know love. That's your issue. So now, before I continue on with these people, a comparison between Abby and Ellie, because I feel like they are two sides of the same coin. I think they're pretty similar. Um, Not ones for feelings, for sure. Ellie always answers, "I'm fine," versus if somebody asks Ellie or Abby if you're okay, she says, "Always."
mm,
Um, the language is different, which we'll talk about. The hair is different, which might seem like a silly detail, but I do want to talk about that. They now both have a bite mark because Ellie bit into Abby's arm on the same side. I don't know if that's true. And then, of course, we can talk about the boss battle and how awful that was. But just beginning with their journeys, which I misspelled on our document there. Um, yeah, how would you trace it, I guess, if you, I mean, do you feel like they're on similar journeys? Does one pick up where the other ends?
hmm. I mean, they're both so driven, I think, as a starting point, in terms of how they work as protagonists, antagonists. And again, not hero and villain, but
Yeah.
Abby's story is definitely one of like, it's a bit more passive because there are forces that sort of pinball her around until she takes agency eventually, which is the day after or the morning after she has sex with Owen. She starts to actually
Mm-hmm.
well, I guess she slips out to find Owen, ahead of the invasion.
Yeah.
Um, but even still, she feels, I don't know, definitely still a part of the system. And so fundamentally, they are different stories where Ellie is sort of going deeper and deeper into a lack of agency, if you want to call it that. This revenge story, which can easily be framed as the sort of like the destiny of a good daughter or something, which is problematic. Whereas what Abby is doing is much more selfless and just better for her soul. It's not about violence; it's about saving people.
Yeah. Obviously their stories are so entwined because, you know, the end of the first game is really the start of Abby's journey. And then it's interesting though that Abby, she has one goal in mind. It's complete and she goes off on her life and lives it. And Ellie, no matter how many of that crew she kills, it's still going.
Yeah.
So it's more, it's like Abby is going up and Ellie is going downhill very quickly, which is interesting to see
Mm-hmm.
for those two. Yeah.
I always like
Mm-mm.
that the sort of dueling narrative arcs. There's a movie called Memories of Murder, which has kind of a similar situation where there's a good detective and a bad detective, and they crisscross, and it's like, wow, good
Yeah.
contrast.
Yep. Absolutely. So there, oh, the language, yes. So I maybe, you know, it's just a detail and it's whatever, but Ellie and even Dina, but I feel like Ellie more so, she'll just fling out F words whenever she wants to.
Yeah.
And Abby seems very particular about when, you know, when she says it, like it's not like she's waiting of when she's gonna say the F word, but it's in moderation. In moderation. Do you think this is telling about their character, or is it just it's just a story choice, a character choice?
I don't know. I mean, it's so essential to Ellie's character, or at least the way we kind of appreciate her,
Yeah.
especially in the first game, where we're so precocious. And so, yeah, you kind of get the sense that Abby is a bit more like conservative in a sense that she was brought up in this very insular society, and so, um, and I don't know, maybe she was a daddy's girl. I don't know.
Yeah.
I want to talk like that.
Yeah, I feel like it gives you a sense of background. You know, Abby, not Abby. Well, I could start with Abby. You said daddy's girl, but yeah, I mean, it seems like she had a more wholesome environment. I mean, just getting a sense from the first time you play as her in the park
Yeah.
and her father and how they interact and everything versus if you had chapter 1 of Ellie as like a 14-year-old, even if left behind, you could see what that was like. But just being born into that particular world, even though they're both fireflies, I feel like there's such a dichotomy between their experiences, and she just had a rough world growing up as an orphan, and so I think she's just one of those off the street rough characters, and maybe Abby's a bit more poised, and yeah, when it counts, she makes it count.
Yep.
Something that I mentioned to you before was the hair. I don't think anyone's talked about this, but Professor Allen, who is my stylist, my chief stylist correspondent, we always talk about Barbara Gordon hair, but I was, especially before I played this game and just the trailers and leading up to it, I was fascinated with the hair choices because pre-Joel death, you've got it very controlled in a bun in the back, and then post-Joel death is kind of like wild and uninhibited and free. And then even if you look at Abby, who always has the fishtail braid, very controlled, which is of course her, I think, just being regulated and militaristic. Do you feel like the hairstyles at all speak to their character? Do you think that's just me grasping at anything?
No, I mean, I think that's bang on, as the Brits might say. But I don't think that's what that means. But I mean, that totally makes sense. But I'm so bad at like noticing details like that, which is weird because, hairstyles are cool and they're the first thing, one of the first things you notice. That's why I'm wearing a hat today, because I don't like the way my hair makes me look. I'm 40 years old. But yeah, no, I was not able to keep track of that. But it's cool that they modified the character models over time. That's
Yeah.
pretty rare.
And even at the end, once you get to the farm, Ellie's hair is shorter and
Mm,
in a different cut. So she changes there. And then, of course, at the end with emaciated Abby, her braid has been shorn off,
yeah.
which is pretty crazy, and haven't worked through what that might potentially mean. But it's interesting because when you go to the pillars, there is a character with a braid there.
Yeah,
And so
I
your
was like,
inclination, yeah, you
yeah.
make a beeline and then you hear like a help me and you turn around, you're
Hmm.
like, whoa, Abby, what happened to your braid? Yeah.
Yeah, that was quite sad.
Oh man. And then I put this here, this boss battle, which technically there are two, but we can save the ending one for when we talk about the ending. Yikes. Talk about
Oh, yeah.
uncomfortability playing as Abby against Ellie, and your goal is to kill her. Thoughts on this boss battle, how it was laid out, how it turned out, the brutality of it, any of it?
Going back to our part two discussion, I think is a cool reflection. We talked about this over text, that it was so reminiscent of the David fight
Yep.
in the first game. I mean, it's the same exact setup. Um, and logistically, it was kind of interesting. Like, how do you even have a boss fight between Abby and Ellie? Well, Ellie's going to get her hands on a bunch of weapons, so
Yeah.
because there's no way that they could fight one on
Yeah.
one. But it was in terms of like what was happening in the narrative, which was so heightened and tense, that really it didn't play well against the gaminess of that section, which I thought was quite frustrating, because they're trying to teach you rules as you play it, because you're not supposed to just attack Ellie outright because she'll just shoot you with a shotgun, which maybe that's too logical, but I died a lot in that segment. I don't know about you.
No, same. Yeah, I think that one, yeah, that was one of the sections that I died many a time. Because she's so quick. She's so quick. She'll turn
Yes.
around. You're like following her, and she'll turn around and everything. Yeah, and then when she started putting the mines out, I was like, no, this is rough. But
Yeah.
I did not like when one point she turned around and said, "There you are." And I thought, no,
Yeah.
why is David in my game again? Which is sick. It is
Yeah.
sick. It is a sick comparison. It was rough. I did not want to do that. I mean, there's one of those things. I did not want to do that, just like I didn't want the end boss battle to be happening either.
Right.
I just thought, what if I kill Ellie as Abby? That would be awful.
I know. Yeah. It's
Ay, ay, ay. I guess.
radical to think about.
Well, why do you think we stayed with Abby in that moment and not Ellie? I mean, that
Yeah.
was an artistic choice right there.
Right, because you could have switched over because Abby's segment was pretty much over at that
Yep.
point. Um, hmm. I don't know, honestly, because it feels like it makes sense. And then, of course, you get to play as Ellie at the end.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't know how, because it might just kind of be an imperfect and impossible segment to really convey in a game with the sort of language that they built up in terms of perspectives. Because if it was Ellie, would it be different or better? I don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Um, and also just the language that was going on in that scene, like just the things Ellie was saying and Abby was saying. I remember being just like very, very, I don't know, like harsh. And it's like, Yeah, it was a very heightened moment, certainly.
It sure was. Oh my gosh. And she was like going through her whole repertoire of, I was thinking to myself, so I got all these weapons to
Yeah,
upgrade Ellie, and now she's using them on me. Because she goes through
clever.
everything. The shotgun, she's got the arrow out, she's got the mines. Yeah, that was one of the boss battles that I really did not like, which I guess is its purpose. Honestly, I don't think you're supposed to feel comfortable with it.
Right.
Guess I would question what you were thinking. Um, yeah, any other comparisons or between Abby and Ellie?
Hmm. Um, Not between Abby and Ellie, but there was the moment where you start in Santa Barbara and you see a pair of Converse, and I was like Ellie, but it was actually Lev, and it might not have been Converse, but I
Yeah,
just thought that was interesting.
yeah, man. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, they're singularly focused, but it seems like Abby might be able to let go a little bit sooner than.
Yeah, I
But
think
if
so.
Lev weren't there, I assume that she would have.
Yep.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Okay. So we'll get back to our characters. We are nearing the end of this, the character list, anyways. We got Owen, which I think you and I are on the same page with this, that I tried to like him. And he has some great things to say, and maybe I liked him a bit more the second time, but I couldn't really get on board and be like a yay Owen kind of champion. Yeah, thoughts with him, thoughts on his relationship with Abby, which ended but didn't really end.
With Owen, I think actually I liked him more in the beginning, and then as you got to know him more, it had sort of the reverse effect. And I think in terms of the writing, they had a similar position with Riley, where the character comes off as very charming, but the charm is sort of filtered through almost like this sort of romantic framing,
Mm,
which it's hard for me to buy into emotionally. And so, like, to have him just be like this, really like he's coming on to you at all times, it's like it was nothing about like my own sexuality. It's just like I don't really care for people like that, or when they're in that mode. And so he's just like on all the time,
yeah.
and you can tell that the game likes him a lot, and
Mm,
you just don't really. So there was that a bit of a disconnect.
yeah. Yeah, I had kind of this frat bro kind of
Yes,
culture with him. I don't know. But he seemed like a decent guy at heart. I mean, he's the one who is fine going after Joel, but not at any cost. Like he even says that to her. And so he's almost like the Jesse, like the moral compass of Abby, you need to get it
yeah,
together, and the nice moments at the aquarium. Just trying to pull her back from the edge. And of course, I think just her single-minded nature, that's one of the relationships that she lost. I can't really tell about his relationship with Mel. Like, is there actually
yeah,
love there? I'm not really sure. I mean, clearly not at the end. He's like ready to go off without Mel. He's like, Mel
right.
will be fine. I thought, okay,
Wow.
that's great. But yeah, him having that scene with the Seraphites, I think then you start to get a sense that there are these other stories of, the combating ideologies, and there are some wolves that might think that there are different types of people in the Seraphites. Whether or not he had an impacting uh, moment or thoughts on all of that, and that it impacted Abby, I can't say. I don't think, but
I think it may have at least primed her,
yeah,
um,
to be
and
more
I think
open.
that is, yeah, and I think that that's the interesting part about Owen's character is that he kind of strikes you as like he never really became a wolf fully, that he was always a firefly,
Yeah,
which maybe let him be vulnerable to having more of an open mind, whereas Abby is a lot more focused.
yeah. Which I think one of his best quotes is certainly, um, I think it was him, right? So those two together, he says, "What happened to us?"
Hmm.
And then I guess as Abby responds, we stopped looking for the light. So I think there's that reconciliation of yikes, we went from one military group to the other, but
Yeah,
I think we lost the better purpose with the fireflies. But
right.
without him, Lev and Abby wouldn't go searching for the fireflies and have this renewed purpose. So I
Hmm.
guess his death serves a purpose. So Abby and Owen have the sex. And It is. So I remember when this was rated M and there's like nudity on there and sexuality or whatever. I was like, okay, so it's going to be Dina and Ellie.
Right.
They make out on the couch, Dina and Ellie. I guess sex is assumed. I don't know. But that then it cuts. But with Owen and Abby, as someone said on YouTube, what was it? It was like this cut out, but I had to watch Owen nail Abby multiple. It was like something like that. I was like, that's accurate, YouTube commenter.
Yeah.
Why? I don't know. What did you think about that particular sex scene?
I mean, the whole thread, like the love triangle, it didn't really land for me at all. So
It's
I,
bizarre.
yeah, and it felt a bit like Showtime, HBO, kind of like, all right, check in the box because, I mean, and maybe that's unfair that like sex scenes automatically have this sort of connotation of like a misfire on what serious things are supposed to be. Um, I mean, they happen. Sex happens in life. I understand, um, but at the same time, just the sort of media environment we live in, where sex is not regular in games still. It does feel like at some point you imagine somebody in the writers' room was like, "This is going to be really slick," like, and it's just. I don't know. It was fine. It didn't bother me, but I was kind of shocked at how graphic it was. I was not expecting it.
Yeah, so yeah, it's interesting that they cut that out. Maybe they weren't comfortable with a lesbian sex scene. I don't know.
Oh God, I don't want to think about that because come on.
Well, why? Those, I felt like Owen and Abby, that was violence. Like he's taking her from
Yeah.
behind, what's happening. And initially at that first aquarium scene, I thought I feel like she's uncomfortable with intimacy. And then, well, maybe not. I mean, all of this stuff is happening. So it was very bizarre for me. And I mean, if you compare it even just to how far Ellie and Dina got, that was like sweet and shipperific versus this one was like, what's happening? You were angry. This is angry sex. I don't
Yes.
like it. I don't like it.
And maybe it was purposely uncomfortable, and we're
I
just
guess
sort of
so.
we didn't get it, but
Yeah.
who knows?
Well, yeah, the rumor on the internet was that Neil Druckmann did the mocap for Owen and that. Who
Why?
are these
Why?
people? Laura
I
Bailey came
know.
on and was like, no, no, he didn't
No.
actually.
Why would that ever happen? Like, come on.
People are weird.
Yes.
Anything else on Owen?
Um, that I do like that line about the light going up
Mm,
because I mean it's almost literal because the fireflies were fighting for something,
yeah,
and the wolves are just kind of, I mean, I guess they're fighting for survival, but yeah, their leader, they don't have that kind of that same goal.
yeah, absolutely. So then I umbrellaed, I don't know, put all the Salt Lake crew into one little bubble. Anything you have to say about any of these guys? So the Salt Lake crew, they're all fireflies, and I assume there'd probably be more, but they all left together and found the wolves, and they were the ones that were all with Abby when she killed Joel, and then you're basically killing off all of them individually as either Ellie or Tommy, depending
Hmm.
on off screen or not. Um, yeah.
I did like that there was that kind of factionalism inside the wolves. It added a bit of a literal dimension, and I like Manny. I thought Manny was kind of a standout
Yeah.
character, for support. And again, so shocked the way he dies. It's just
Yeah.
like, ugh. The way in which violence is or deaths are depicted in this game is, I don't want to say it was so real, but it was really shocking, like literally shocking the way it's framed. And even like when I think it's Dina when she's attacking Abby and she gets hit by an arrow. It's like it's so the camera's focus is so tight that you don't see it coming, and
Hmm.
yeah, it's really good
Yeah,
in that sense.
absolutely. Yeah, I like how they watch out for each other.
Mm,
Nora tells them about Owen and Danny, and even Isaac says can't pull apart the or no secrets between the Salt Lake
yeah,
crew, and that they all join together, which I think is great. And really, I wouldn't have cared about any of those people dying. I mean, Jordan or Leah
oh
or
no,
I can't remember who the other Kevin, I think was
yeah,
the
maybe
Asian guy. I don't know. I didn't care about any
Jerry,
of those or even Manny or Nora or any of that. But then you play as Abby. And that's the worst part because the game, like I said, the game spoils itself. You know that all these people are going to die, but then you're spending a large amount of time with Manny, who's charming. He's a bit of a
Yeah.
womanizer. However, I found his love shack the second playthrough. I had no idea.
Wow.
And then you're with him, and yeah, you're fighting Tommy, which another uncomfortable moment is like, oh gosh, not another
Yeah.
sniper, and now it's someone you
Right.
know. And then you're about to go in, and he stands up and gets shot. I was like, oh, no, and I
Yeah.
never would have felt that way. So the game does a great job of having you care about these characters, and then a terrible job of taking them away from you, like Alice too.
Yes, Alice.
Yeah,
And I think Manny was kind of the most successful of those
yeah,
characters. Because
I
I mean,
agree.
even I mean, Jordan, like he was such a douche, and then you see him for like one scene, so that was fine.
Yep.
But yeah, you spent a lot of time with him, and he was cool. Like he comes and helps you, even though he thinks it's a bad idea. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's sad to see him go.
Yeah, and Alice, the dogs have names, which makes it worse when you kill them. So Alice, you're with for couple missions, I guess. I mean, you're at least when Mel is along, you're with Alice, and then later on at the aquarium, Alice is there, and so you're having moments where you're tossing the ball or the
Oh,
octopus to Alice, and then one of the toss the balls was to Bear, and I was like, oh no, Bear, I killed him as Ellie before in front of the hospital, so it's terrible. But then
yep,
when you as Ellie have killed Alice, I guess previously, you're just like, oh no, this was
yeah,
terrible. And Alice bonding with Yara and Lev, terrible, terrible, terrible. So
Ellie.
I know. How dare you? Anything else? Salt Lake Crew?
It was interesting. I mean, they're kind of the thrust of the game in a sense. That
Yeah.
the whole point is that there's that flim flam, so it's interesting. But
Mm-hmm.
honestly, I think maybe they could have been fleshed out a little bit more. But how much do you sort of push that
Yeah.
before it becomes absurd? I don't know.
Yeah. But I agree with you that Manny, I think, was the most successful because I couldn't really get on board with other people. And you didn't have much time with Nora either.
Right.
So that one was hard too. Um, Isaac, who is mentioned so much in literature via artifacts that you'd think he'd be a bigger character, but he was not. I did find out via Neil Druckmann. I didn't find out. It was he said it that apparently he knew Abby's father. So that's kind of their connection, I think, when they left Salt Lake and they were able to get into the Wolves. So this guy I think is interesting because Abby is talking to Yara, I think, when they return to the island, and they're discussing just motivations, and she flat out tells Yara, I'm pretty sure it's Yara, that Isaac wants an end to the fighting at any cost. So it's almost like, oh, here's another character that we've got that has a single-minded purpose, that at any cost is what's going to happen. But it's interesting that that observation is coming from a character that had that before. So I think you can kind of see how far Abby has come in that she's making that. What do you think about this guy? And of course, his confrontation with Abby, who that literally comes into play at any cost. He's about to shoot Abby in order to get to one scar
Yeah.
behind her, which was really yikes.
Almost kind of Hollywood movie-ish. It's like, but do you
Mm.
really care that much? But Isaac is really interesting because he's built up so much.
Mm-hmm.
They characterize him so well, and then when he appears, he certainly has that gravitas because it's Jeffrey Wright. Um, but he doesn't do anything. Like he does basically nothing, and so I think he works more as a symbol or like a cipher because he really embodies the fear culture that's kind of permeating the wolves. That everybody's afraid of Isaac, and you talk to him, and he kind of commands the whole room. But yeah, in terms of a function in the story itself, is pretty minimal.
Yeah. And you kind of get a sense of who this guy is, mostly from, I think, the artifacts. He was at the very beginning. So Fedra, of course, had all these, because Seattle used to be a QZ. I guess it technically is, even though the Wolves have taken it over. But he was one of the people, the main dissidents that wrested control from Fedra. So he's been there since day one. And then, of course, the Wolves. But as you are going to meet him with Manny, and you see the Seraphites in cages, and you see
Yeah,
the naked Seraphite in the chair, and he's like, don't let him fall asleep. You're like, yikes.
yeah,
And there used to be a truce between, well, we'll get into groups, but there used to be a truce, and it seems like he was probably one of the people that would have been the agent of the truce with the Seraphites, and then that broke down. But yeah, he just wants to. Well, I guess we'll talk about that too. What the motivation is of the wolves. But yeah, he seems like an intimidating guy, especially when he says that Owen shot Danny because of some scar, and then Abby says that's bullshit, and he turns around and like just looks at her, and then she
Yeah.
like changes tactic, and you're like, wow, that right there is like the teacher mom gaze.
Yep.
You just overstepped. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. And then he gets killed almost unceremoniously, though. I'm glad that it's Yara.
Yeah.
She gave it to him good.
Yes, she
But
did. And then she got executed, and it was, oof, that was a lot of violence in a row.
that's a lot of violence. First she was shot, and I was like, no,
Yep.
not Yara.
No.
And then yeah. Yeah. Anything else on Isaac for his short role?
I wonder how much his relationship with Abby's father would have played into the
Mm,
story, because I didn't know that until you just mentioned it. So I don't
yeah,
know.
I'm not sure. I mean, after I don't know if like they were at Salt Lake. Well, that's interesting if you think about timeline, because it would have had to have been before all that.
Right.
Because Fedra was, I don't even know if there are any Fedra QZs anymore in the US. That'd be interesting to know. But yeah, I guess he
Mm,
had to leave and then start this up. Who knows? I'm not sure. An
I don't know.
interesting side story, perhaps.
Could be. Yep.
Yara and Lev. What do you think of these two characters?
Standouts, I think. Yeah, I think Lev might be my favorite character too. He's just,
Yeah.
I think certainly the sorts of the most emotional pull that wasn't sort of complicated. And Yara is interesting. I didn't think that she was going to die. Actually, I did not see that one coming at
Yeah.
all.
I didn't either. It was very sad. I guess that you should never let someone go ahead of you
Yes.
outside of a window. Frankly, you
Right.
need to be that first person. You need to take the bullet. Yeah, that was super sad. Just especially, I was thinking to myself, after all of that, I had to go to a hospital. I had to face my acrophobia, fight the Rat King. Your arm was amputated, and now you're dead.
Yes.
So that was, yeah. And, especially for Lev, just that, yeah, that was just so traumatic. And I felt like it was humanizing for Yara that at first Yara was so against what Lev had done.
Hmm.
But then, just realizing how much she loved her brother. So I thought that was a great moment there.
And you can
Um,
also you get the sense that without Yara, Lev really would be lost.
mm,
And so it's important that Abby takes that role.
yeah,
Um, yeah.
very true. Okay. So then we just talk about the groups themselves. So their motivations. I do want to talk about representation of religion, how some of these themes like extremism and fascism tie into the main threads of the story. Can these groups coexist? Those sorts of things. So lots with these. So our main groups are the Seraphites and the WLF, but I feel like the Fireflies are kind of always there in the background as like a comparison potentially.
Yeah.
But what do you feel like the motivation is for the WLF compared to what the Firefly motivation was way back when?
Hmm. I guess we touched on it a little bit, because I think they're just more about survival. Where the Fireflies, I think, maybe started as more of an insurgent, upset people group, but then they sort of randomed on this, the immunity.
Yeah.
Whereas the Wolves, really, it's a much darker situation they found themselves in, because they just have to make the best of this situation. There is no out. And so maybe that's how you get a character like Isaac, who is just so dark, um, and could be where Abby would have ended up, and she would have
Mm,
become something like that. Yeah, the WLF, now thinking about it, are interesting because it's like they are very successful. They've got this big setup and hundreds, thousands of people maybe, and Isaac is kind of like that's who you would need to create something like that maybe. But in terms of their motivation, I don't know if it stretches beyond survival.
yeah. Do you feel like they were at all on the side of the citizens? Because a lot of people thought that Fedra was corrupt, or trying to think of like some good terms here, just withholding food and not being on the side of the citizens. But then the WLF, they say that they're for the citizens, but then we also have some artifacts that are like they're killing citizens. So
Right.
is there anything, I mean, is that initially what they were trying to do, wrest control from the government in order to give it back to the people, but it got tainted somewhere along the line?
I think that would make sense. It's kind of the Star Wars thing where the sequel trilogy was supposed to be about how the rebels kind of become the Empire, because that's sort of just what happens. That it's not the power vacuum. It's just sort of like you just become. Well, maybe in a sense, maybe it is that certain circumstances in the world dictate transformations in you or whatever. So there maybe there's a determinism there that no matter what your intentions are setting out, you will always kind of become this mold, which, one day it's the Fedras, one day it's the Wolves, and one day it's the Rattlers. So, yeah.
Uh, what about the Seraphites? What do you think their motivations are?
That one is a bit murkier to me. And I wonder if it's because of what happened with Far Cry 5, where they had to kind of scale back on a bit of the detail. Because I never really got a sense for the Seraphites really generally, because they were always just spouting like stereotypical fundamentalist nonsense. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess they were trying to like isolate themselves on that island, and they are already living on an island. So I guess like why did they need to be out in Seattle? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It seems like, at least with Emily, I think you get that line of they are nested with sin. So it seems like there's some motivation to cleanse. However that means, because it seems like they do it to whomever. They've got the WLF, of course, which are their bitter enemies, but it also seems like, as you see in the artifacts, that they're rustling up average citizens as well. And I mean, they go after Ellie for sure,
yeah.
which is true of the WLF. Just shoot on sight kind of situation. What's interesting is, because clearly they are portrayed negatively, but it is from Yara that you get a sense of what the religion should have been, or how it began, which Yara is a really wise young woman. And so she was talking about the original writings, which I guess maybe her name was what, Seraphina, I don't know, or the prophet, I guess we could call her. And so violence didn't enter into anything, so very Christ-like, where love thy neighbor kind of situation. But it was after her death that everything sort of started to get perverted and everything. And so I like the representation of this personally, even though I am a Christian, because like that's spot on. Like people, we've gone so far, and people have their own interpretations, that it's so changed from what it should be, and how it was originally. So I felt like that was successful. But I can't tell, are they, yeah, just trying to root out all of what has happened? And I I would love to have more information on the Seraphites, like a
Yeah.
comic or a DLC or a novel. I don't know, but this woman, you only get a sense of. I mean, this is, I guess, one of the negative things about artifacts is blink if you miss it. There's a ripped up sheet in the tunnels, and it talks about a woman of a community that they kept infection away from it. And even Yara says like these miraculous things happened that no one could really explain. You don't know why. I mean, the scars are because of that lady, but you don't know how she got it. And it's just like all these questions. And she was made into a martyr, it seems like, by Isaac. I have so many questions on these people, so I'm kind of intrigued by them. They're awful. They're awful at face value, obviously. Because you love so quickly Yara and Lev, that you're on their side. But it's complicated for Yara, who still wants to remain a part of that community, and Lev, who loves his mother and is trying to get her. But yeah, it's like they got their hooks in you, and you can't do anything. And some of them are, I don't know, brainwash might be like an insulting word, but because the mother is like ready to kill Lev for what he did.
Mm.
So I feel like it's really intriguing. I feel like it represents them well in terms of like, yeah, absolutely, this is the kind of stuff that happens. Um, but
I mean, that context that you gave about how initially they start out with better intentions, I didn't pick up on any of that, and I wish I had. I wish they had kind of foregrounded maybe a little bit more
Yeah.
the idea. Maybe they had drawn a connection between like Al Qaeda and Islam, the way that this is not a representation of the
Yeah.
religion. It's an extreme perversion, as fundamentalism is. But you know, I feel like I just feel like there was something missing there, especially since like there's such a recurrent equivalence between the wolves and the scars. They both have phrases where it's like you know, I wish you a swift death or whatever, and they say something back, and then
Yeah.
the Seraphites say like, oh, I can't remember what they say, but
May she
I
protect you, and yeah.
yes, may she protect you. And so you have this sort of call and response on both sides that happens
Yeah.
a lot. But it's like, well, do the similarities just end there? Like they can't. So yeah, I don't know. I don't want to call it like a weak point in the game or anything because
Yeah.
the mission was still accomplished. But I don't know.
Well, I suppose it's unsuccessful in that maybe it's too subtle. Like
Yeah,
if you're only getting stuff from artifacts and conversations that you may have been paying attention to something else and you missed it, then what was the point of that? And you haven't gotten a sense of who that group is. And maybe it's, as you said, it may have been a symptom of Far Cry 5, and they were toning it back maybe, and because people, maybe they thought people wouldn't be as interested in it, or they didn't want to be beat over the head with religion. But maybe it's just for people like me who are interested in the religious aspect, and so I was trying to get a sense of what that's like. But you know, Lev even talks about strength and like think of all the good things that come from fear, and you know, all of that stuff. And then there's that connection between seraphites and fireflies, almost of like find, you know, find the light, or there's a light in the darkness. So this positivity that which is, I think, one of the reasons why Lev is on board with finding the fireflies, because maybe there's some similar ideologies there as well.
yeah, yeah. That's interesting. I mean, because maybe like Liv doesn't know any other life, and
Yeah.
so it's just man. But I feel like you were pretty nervous going into this game for that reason. For just it's like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a game where they talk about religion, and they, you know, that could easily go south.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so the friend that got leaked, of course, he's like, this already happened with Far Cry 5, and I was doing research on what did they do there, and I guess I looking at the cult and whatever that was, and so I don't like religion looked at and like made fun of, and that sort of thing. But I think if it's used well, like that, there is a perversion to it, because there certainly is now. I think I can certainly get on board with that. And even though they're villainized, you have likable characters that are coming from that, and you can kind of understand how this happened as well. So I think if any of those positive aspects were taken out, then I wouldn't have liked the Seraphites as much as I did, because they're horrifying and they're not a good group of people. But there we are. Um, yeah, so you had brought up about, yeah, how these themes of extremism and fascism tie into the main threads of the story, or if they have to. So you want to take that one first? Because it's a complicated question.
Well, it's hard because I mean, again, this is the genre we're working with, and you have the sort of the key texts, at least the contemporary ones, like The Walking Dead and Game of Thrones and things like that, where um, there is this sort of cynical worldview, especially on The Walking Dead, from what I have heard about specifically the show, which is a lot different than the game and maybe the comic. But that is just all about like you have to be tough in this world, dude, in order to survive and screw everybody else, which is very also like 28 Days Later and things like that. And I don't, you know, I think there's a danger in projecting a post-apocalypse of dipping into sort of like or glorifying our more toxic tendencies like extremism and like fascism and saying that these things are inevitable. But I think that The Last of Us does grapple with them a bit more. And it's definitely part two, especially is a story about individuals in the context of these larger forces and the choices that they make, which again is it relates to the ending, why choice is important. That you know to reject some of these values that are seen as integral to survival itself.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you there. I was trying to think of all the post-apocalyptic and post-pandemic things that I've seen or watched. You know, you have Hunger Games, which of course there was control there with the government, but then I feel like Station 11, which is a great book, um, you don't see that control as much. Of course, you have groups popping up, but not like an overarching, because the government tried to lock down and control everything. So I think all of this was like inevitable if that is the case of extreme control. I guess groups will just pop up, and it depends on what the group is like, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about our world and how we have sort of responded to the pandemic, it's not really with extremism or extreme control. It's actually been quite laissez-faire, which is not what we need. And so it's interesting. I guess it's just another present day parallel that was,
Yeah.
I wish we weren't talking about, but there it is.
Yeah. But even, yeah, you know, if you think about like the masks, which have become so politicized, you've got the groups that are like, just wear the mask, and then
That's
others that
true.
are, it's impinging on my, infringing on my freedom.
Yep, clearly.
So any little thing, yeah, could potentially
Yeah,
create
that's
some
sad.
sort of group. The wolves. Do you feel like any of these groups can coexist, especially if we're talking about like a military group with a religious group? I mean, was it inevitable that that truce was going to fail? Part of me feels like Isaac made that truce fail, but I don't know.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely something sorted going on there.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. It's weird because there's a lot of resources in the world that you'd think there wouldn't be that much territorializing. Um, but maybe there's just something so like affronting. God, I'm losing my words, I guess. Something so offensive about these other groups that you just have to go to war with them. But um, I don't know. I mean, I think it would be cool if The Last of Us Part 3 was actually more about like exactly what you're talking about, like reconciliation between groups
Yeah.
on a society level rather than just an individual one.
Yeah. And it seems like in this society, I mean, I guess the United States or the world as a whole, everyone's knee-jerk reaction is to shoot first and ask questions later.
Yeah.
Jackson may be an exception, but it's like you don't give anyone a chance potential. I don't even know how someone gets involved in the WLF.
Right.
You know, if you like walk up to it, I mean, because Fireflies apparently joined uh, kind of late in the game and found something. Or no, what was it? Oh, that was how they got information about Tommy, I guess. Fireflies. I'm like, they didn't shoot you first, which
Right.
was how I thought. You know, initially I didn't know how I was going to get on board with the WF because they're just presented really terribly that they shoot you and then you're Abby and you're, I don't know. I guess she didn't shoot anyone first, but it's just this humanizing to this potentially villainous group, which was interesting. But I guess it's true of any other group that we could have seen, like Ellie. They would wonder why this Jackson group is shooting first and not asking
That's right.
questions. So, anything else on that section? We're about to get to the ending.
I guess one bullet point that we didn't hit specifically was the Rattlers.
Oh, yes.
What did you think about them?
Gosh. Frankly, I did not want another group that I had to contend with if
Yeah.
I needed to get to Abby, though I guess maybe it was good that I wasn't single-mindedly. I've said this so many times, you could probably drink every time I say single-mindedly, going for Abby. But yeah, they seem terrible, terrible. Not only slavers, they have people get bit intentionally in order to punish them, and then they hook them on chains. Um, Trying to think of what other stuff they have done. Yeah, so if you don't produce, you know, enough crops or whatever, or pick, everyone's not eating well, so they're emaciated, and it was a terrible, terrible group. So I didn't feel as bad when I was shooting my explosive arrows at them. I was also letting loose the infected as much as I could, which was fun, and just seeing how many I could get rid of. So they were, I feel like if I were to compare them into any group, they'd be like the survivors or the scavengers. I can't remember, from Pittsburgh. Just a terrible group that you wouldn't want to ever run up against. But I think that just goes to show that everywhere you've got these groups potentially that are forming, and some of them are good and some of them are bad. But yeah. Oh man, I just wanted it to be easy for Lev and Abby, and then they,
Nope.
I know.
Oh man, I actually kind of want to play that section again because it was so frustrating to me when you are assaulting the domed building.
Oh,
Because I didn't even think about releasing the zombies because I didn't have a sense for how you would do that without getting attacked by them. And so I didn't die that many times in that section, but I kept getting caught and running away and hiding in grass. And then they would
Gotcha.
just be like, "Oh, what was that?" And then go back to their patrols.
Yeah.
So it was like a Looney Tune trial and error. But in terms of the Rattlers, I feel like there's a bit of a nuance there because they're so evil, but they're also arbitrarily evil because there's no reason for any of
Yeah.
this to be happening, any of what they're doing. The Seraphites are sort of like fundamentalists. There's a rationale for why they're doing these horrific acts, but
Mm-hmm.
with them, it's like you see them and they're just normal people. And they're actually kind of douchey. They seem like almost like South Beach, like frat, or like they just have this weird quality. And they're wearing like helmets, like they look so dumb. Like they got like roller pads. Like you hate everything
Yeah.
about them. So it was interesting. Um, but I also feel like they're kind of symptomatic of, um, like when I think about The Last of Us now as a franchise, I think a lot about Breaking Bad in terms of like
Mm.
this is coming from people who do not have the same kind of darkness in their hearts as creators as some other kinds of artists, but they're making a very dark story, and
Yeah.
so you end up with characters like the Rattlers, which sounds so innocuous and kind of lame, and they look dumb, but they're really evil and dark,
Yeah.
and so it's just I don't know, it's weird,
Yeah. I guess they didn't want to make it too easy for everybody.
right?
I thought maybe they were cannibals at first because they make some sort of comment with Abby that she'll last for a while, and I thought, oh no.
Yeah.
But really, it's just manual labor.
Hmm.
But yeah, just if anyone, yeah, so they'll either be bit as a punishment or put on those pillars at the beach and just they hang there basically until they suffocate, I assume. Um, yeah, pretty
I
rough.
mean, when you see that, that's when you gotta start thinking, are we the baddies? Because that's very
It's
evil.
all for survival. Yeah, I know. The what are you going to do for survival, I guess? What limits do you have?
Hmm.
Well, before we get into the end as like a nice little light moment, do you have a favorite moment or any favorite moments of the game that you would like to share before we get to the sadness?
Just in terms of gameplay, I already kind of highlighted that first part with Abby. I really, I don't know, it's kind of thrilling. Um, but in terms of specific moments, I guess there was that part where you were on top of a plane and you were like sniping people. That was kind of exciting because it wasn't obvious that you had to do that. So I was like, ooh, I'm getting one over on the video game, but clearly that was part of the design.
I frankly any moment with Lev, but that whole skyrise or
Yeah.
skybridge section is my favorite section for multiple reasons. With how low it brings Abby, which sounds really sick on my part, but just you've got this like person who's really confident and all of a sudden like she is freaking out and you've got a 13-year-old talking her down like you'll be okay. And then I guess as a diversionary tactic, Lev says, so what's up with you and that guy Owen? And Abby's like, really, Lev, now? It seemed really awkward. I thought, oh, you are my favorite. It was that moment that endeared Lev to me forever.
Hmm.
So just any of those moments and yeah, I think that like we've both said, I think that relationship is perhaps one of the best moments that we have in this game, and it's just fun of how much of a goober Lev is once you find out which he makes mistakes that you wouldn't really think about
Yeah.
what those mistakes would have been. But yeah, that sky, that man alive, oh, so good. I like it so much.
Yep.
Okay, so here we are. It's the ending. Just trying to see. We covered some of this stuff. I just have a note of repeated gut punches for me. Just because you're at the farm, you think it's nice. It's not. You've got the dance scene, of course, which is the gut punch of the Joel relationship because you think, oh, maybe those are her final words to Joel. And then she leaves Dina. She leaves Dina. Ay, ay, ay. So she returns to the search. I think we already said that it was probably going to happen without Tommy.
Yeah.
Um, well, I guess we can just get into this boss battle here. I mean, this is what we're talking about, aren't we? Ellie versus Abby, another boss battle, another one that I really did not want to engage in.
Yeah.
Thoughts on the control I mean, Abby did not want to fight. Ellie was like, you're fighting me.
Yeah.
She puts a knife to Lev's throat in order to get Abby to fight her. It's a little unfair. They're both, I suppose, on the same level, but Abby is malnourished. Ellie does have her side wound, but Ellie also has a knife. So it kind of teased me off a bit at this whole fight that they both happen. But I don't know, thoughts and feelings going into this fight. And then, of course, Ellie ends up not killing Abby, even though Abby's head is underwater and Ellie could have drowned her. So, should she have, and why didn't she kill her? So I goes, so your feelings on the fight overall, and then the end result of it.
I remember just being like so blown away with what I was seeing and interacting with in a game because it was on my TV and I just never seen that level of brutality between two female characters. I don't think ever because they don't usually have them fist fighting unless it's like Charlie's Angel Kung Fu,
Yeah.
and it was really unsettling. Maybe it shouldn't be, but it was for now, and yeah, and it was definitely sad. It was sad to see Abby in that state. It was interesting that you were controlling Ellie, who was the less sympathetic character in that moment, and so you're definitely being pushed to do something you don't want to do, which is weird because you maybe if you were being Abby, it's like you have more of a motivation. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Don't. Oh, and then the other questions. Why didn't you kill Abby?
And should she
Um,
have? Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I really thought that that was just going to be it, and that was one of my questions because I don't know why she doesn't kill Abby. She just finds that she doesn't have it in her at the end, and maybe there is this sort of building mythology of like, well, revenge is the only way. But maybe she's piecing something together with Lev and Abby that like, oh, maybe it doesn't have to be like this. I don't know. That's the only explanation I can come up with.
Yeah. I think that was one of the moments. Leaving the farm was problematic for me emotionally. And then when this whole fight thing happened, and I figured out that I had to fight her, and I think initially, like, you approach Abby or you do something, maybe Abby comes at you, I guess. But I paused the game and stood up from my chair and like put my hands on my head because I really did not want to. I mean, I honestly feel like if there are no heroes or villains besides the Rat Wars, I feel like in this moment Ellie becomes a villain.
Yeah, yeah,
It was awful. I didn't want to watch that at all. Putting a knife to Lev's neck, I mean, everything was mirrored because that was what Ellie said basically, that Dina wasn't a part of it or to spare
right.
Tommy. And then, Abby is saying this. It's, yeah. Um, I don't think I'm glad she didn't kill Abby, frankly. I'm glad she
Yes.
didn't kill Abby. Because it's just a never ending cycle. I mean, I'm sure something would have happened. Lev could have grown up, right? And is that part three? Lev grows up and then comes
Yes.
after Ellie potentially. I feel like she had that flash, right, of Joel on the porch, which at the time you have no context for because you haven't seen that cutscene yet. But I think going back afterwards, some people had said that she forgave, which was a weird tense. She forgave Joel and therefore she was forgiving Abby. And I don't think she had forgiven Joel yet. I think she was in the process of. I don't know if she's in the process of forgiving Abby, but I feel like she actually reflected on what she was doing for once.
Right.
Because it was insane, like what she was doing. And when she got hurt, she's like, Abby, I'm coming for you, you better not be
Yeah.
dead, like all this, no one's there, but she's talking to herself about it. And I feel like at that moment she may have actually seen like, oh, this is what I've become, and to finally end it and stop. I don't know what. I guess maybe that flash of Joel may have been it, maybe the fingers, I don't know, which was rough. I had to look away at that point
Oh,
too.
yeah.
But I feel like in that moment, though, I have hope for Ellie
Mm,
because if Ellie had killed Abby, I could see no redemption for that character. And even now, it's kind of hard to redeem that character potentially.
yeah.
But at least in stepping back, letting them go, I feel like, oh, there's a possibility for this character to have a better journey than she was currently on. And so I do like that there's that potential optimism, though she does have a lot to reckon with, and she loses a lot. There are so many ramifications from what happened, and that's on her. But so I'm glad she didn't, and I think maybe she didn't because she had that flash and she's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be this type of person, this villain,
I
this David character.
That's important. I didn't even remember about that flash, but yeah, I can see it now. And I mean, first of all, I think it is important that she does lose the farm and Dina, because that's actually kind of rare for American media, especially around the time of the original Last of Us, where it was the end of Breaking Bad, the movie Prisoners. I just felt like they had these really weird cop-out endings in a sense. And so that's commendable. But I think also my confusion with why didn't she kill Abby was also just, I guess I had some sort of arithmetic going in where in order for her to um, not, or to forgive Abby, I guess she would have to fully come to terms with who Joel really was,
Mm-hmm.
apart from being a father figure, that he was not a great guy, to sort of overcome her drive for revenge. And that wasn't what those flashbacks were about. I don't think it was more about just um, he's trying. I don't know. So
Yeah.
a lot of what I was seeing at the end was certainly going against what I was expecting, which is
Mm-hmm.
fine. But there was no, I guess, landing for me personally. I was pretty confused for the whole thing.
Yeah, I feel like, and I actually read a romance novel where one of the lead characters, like, it had been a year or so since her beloved had been killed, and so this frequent thing is like she would only remember the positive aspects, and so it annoyed a potential love interest, and so I feel like that's what the flashbacks do, potential,
Yeah,
where there's this loss and she's only remembering the good aspects of what that was like, and I feel like there are some negative ones in there as well, finding out that Joel lied to her and everything, and then
yeah.
her harsh words at him at the dance. But yeah, that could be, she's got her like one vision of who Joel is. But
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know if forgiving Abby, I don't think that's the right word. Like, I think she might be resigned that this is it, Joel is dead. Anything
Yeah,
that Ellie does is not going to bring Joel back. And
I
I
think
feel
that's
like
close. Yeah.
she's finally coming to terms with that.
Mm.
And in a really terrible way, because she, losing those two fingers, she is now unable to wholly play the guitar. I mean, she could switch hands, I suppose, but that's, her one remaining connection with Joel. So she lost a lot. She comes home and she's lost Dina and JJ. So there's a heavy price to pay for that, which I appreciate, however much it made my heart ache. But I think they did a good job with that. But yeah, her returning to Jackson. What did you think about that whole scene with the guitar, her leaving the guitar, and then having that final cut scene or flashback with Joel on the porch?
Now with some distance, I think I'm better with it, because initially playing through, I was just like, oh my god, this is never gonna end. So um, now that you're sort of connecting the pieces for me, it's like, yeah, it's interesting that her revenge quest ultimately just severs that final connection she had with Joel. Like that's really heartbreaking, even for a character who has gone that far and done so many things. That it is ultimately a moral story arc, I guess, and lesson, if you want to sort of be punitive about it. But yeah, I mean, uh, I don't know. It's just it's sad. It makes me
Yeah,
sad.
yeah. I mean, she, yeah, attempts to play Future Days one more time, and some of the notes are dead, of course. And we could say that the guitar is her last connection to him. I feel like there's so much more, though. I mean, the guitar is
Yeah.
the thing that brought the moth. She still has the moth tattoo. I noticed that she's wearing the shirt that Joel wore in The Last of Us Part One, unless they
Uh,
just designed it similarly. But it looks the same. I mean, when she left Jackson, well, when she left the farm, she was wearing his jacket. So and there are memories too. So I feel like there's still that connection there, but she's left behind, this toxic part potentially of
mm,
what their relationship was. I imagine
that's
she's still
interesting.
going to have some PTSD. I don't think that goes away
Right.
easily. But
Um, and that kind of speaks to how I thought the game was going to end. When you see the farm for the first time, it reminded me a lot of well, once you had the post traumatic stress, it reminded me a lot of the movie Okja. I don't know if you saw that one on Netflix.
I haven't, about the
Um,
giant pig.
yes, the giant pig. So I don't want to spoil it or anything, but essentially the character sort of gets what they were trying to do they accomplished the mission, but something is lost.
Mm.
And I think that ending it with that final PTSD would have been fine. But now that we sort of worked through it together, I think it's important that Ellie does make the choice to go back.
Yeah.
But I forget why, because now I am, it's we're getting so late into the recording that I'm starting to get a little loopy.
So sorry, man. This runtime is way more than I thought it was going to be. Well,
It's
that
good.
happens.
It's an epic.
Yeah, I guess so. People are they were making fun of me on Twitter. They're like, that's going to be as long as your playtime. I'm like, my playtime was 34 hours. You think it's going to be that long? Yeah. Where do you think Ellie goes?
I mean, I think The Last of Us Part 3 would probably have to be about Ellie still, probably. And so, I don't know. I don't know where she goes. I guess I was pretty satisfied with that being her last, that like this is the last that we see of her. And it's a really sad downer note,
Yeah.
considering where she starts.
Mhm.
Like, did she really sort of deserve all this? And I think not. I think ultimately, to hint at redemption is good, but to have her be redeemed, I think would be a little strange, just based on the premise of the character, that she is essentially living this afterlife that she did not want, and that is not good for anybody else. Which again is like a really complicated character concept to grapple with. So I think they did so as well as they could, and delicately. But yeah, I mean, I'd be happy with this being the last that we see of her. I don't know how you feel about it.
Well, like I said, I'm conditioned to want a happy ending. So I think that was one of the reasons why I was so heartsick the next day, is that I recognized that, gosh, she lost so much. And I shouldn't say lost, because she did it intent, like it was her decision. But she pushes away so much, and not being with Dina and JJ. My heart of hearts is that she would go to Jackson proper and find them, especially since she writes about the little potato, as she calls him, in her journal, and thinks about him, that I would hope that she would try to go find him. But I don't know. Maybe it makes sense for her journey, though, that she's gone through so much that she doesn't go back there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. According to the end screen, where at the very beginning, now that at the end, the first screen that you have, press any button for start, it's a boat in a foggy harbor, and you realize once you get there that that's the final confrontation. There it is, confrontation. And then after you beat the game, there's a new end screen, and it's actually Catalina with another
Yeah.
boat. So the assumption is that Abby and Lev have landed, and hopefully they'll find the Firefly settlement, so we can at least hope happy endings there. And perhaps you answered this already, but just, yeah, if there were a part 3, what do you think Ellie and Abby's story would be? Would they both be in there? Would it be a completely different?
I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see Abby again, although I'd
Okay.
like to.
Yeah.
And not just because of pressure from the worst fans.
Yeah.
But
Oh gosh, is like a Rose Pico, is that her name from
yeah,
Star
exact
Wars?
or
We're like,
Tico, yeah,
yeah, Tico, yeah.
which is
Mm-mm-mm.
definitely the case.
Yeah.
I almost don't want to even speculate about Ellie, because it's just like you would have to have her fighting zombies and killing people. It's just like, oh, poor baby. Can she
Take a
just not?
rest. Yeah.
Yeah. But how do you get that happy ending, So
Yep.
maybe it would be worth it.
Yeah. I think as I was getting closer to the end, I had this horrible thought that Ellie was going to die, but she was
Mm.
going to sacrifice her life for the cure.
Oh,
And so I feel like, and I mean, it didn't happen, so I'm kind of okay. But I feel like if we were to end it well for the character, I think it would finally be to give that character the purpose that was taken away from her and that she always wanted. I don't know how that happens, though, because we've lost our doctor. Every
right.
now all the medicine and teaching is like secondhand or third hand. I don't even know. But I just thought, like, oh, that kind of makes sense, because you have Lev and you've got the Fireflies there. So what if there's another intersection, and now like they're coming to look for Ellie for the cure, and then at the end she like gives herself up, and that's the end, and that's the happy ending, even though people don't want Ellie to die. I mean, that's what she wanted all along. So that
Hmm.
would be the only thing that I would think. But
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense, and that would be cool. And if not that, at least something equivalent for her to at least create a new purpose for herself, if not find the old one, because
yeah,
um, it is the post-apocalypse, and you have to sort of like start over and figure yourself out.
yeah. Well, probably Neil Druckmann has got her in some sort of Midwestern town away from Jackson, and that's her life. And she's I don't know, 30-year-old woman, and she's never seen Dina again, and my heart will break. That's what'll happen.
Yep.
Or this will be it. This will be it. I mean, he said if there's a story to tell, he'll tell it, but he's not going to just force it upon, force a sequel upon us. So,
Yeah,
plus, I
certainly
think
not
we
right
need some
away.
space. Yeah, I think we need some space with this one for sure. Okay, well, I think that's it. Anything else?
Would you recommend the game to a layperson?
That's a good question. To a what? A layperson? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, oh boy. I think I would have to really know the person well to judge like is this going to be a worthwhile. I would more easily recommend part 1 than part 2.
Yeah.
Because I think part 2, many people, and I think that's the great gift of it, that it's attracted so many people. A lot of people have these great stories about it. But with part 2, I don't know if we're going to have people that are like, this was such a great game. It impacted my life forever. I mean, it impacted me, but not in a good
Yeah.
way. So it's hard. Like you're going in with this recommendation willingly sort of putting pain on someone, honestly.
Right.
And again, I had an enjoyable time. I was engaged. I think it's an amazing experience, but it negatively affected me as more so potentially than positive. So I think that's the only thing is like, are you a masochist for like, or a sadist? Are you a sadist? I don't
Masochist.
remember which is
Oh
it.
yeah, it would be both, I guess.
But yeah, hoisting it upon somebody. So that would be my only concern. So do I want to give that to Donovan? I don't think so. I mean, he talks about not wanting to watch Walking Dead because it seems so dour and there's no hope or anything. So I don't think that he would like this either.
Yeah, well, the first game is definitely more colorful and hopeful, I
Yeah.
think, until the very end. And this game is just sort of like that microcosm stretched into a 30-hour experience. So
Yeah, for
yeah,
sure. So you agree? Would you say?
yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, the first one is easy to recommend.
Yeah.
I think it's very accessible gameplay wise, and it's just got a really great story that feels compact and concise. This one is harder because it's a lot more sprawling. It's more of a time investment, and it's more difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. My nephew was texting me as I was playing and asking if I had beaten it yet, and I said not yet. And I guess he was watching someone stream it, and he was interested in playing it. And I said I highly recommend playing the first one first because he had yet to play it. And then I guess he mentioned Jesse died. I was so sad, which is interesting because he's just watching a stream.
Yeah.
But he was invested in it. But I wonder how, yeah, his feelings were as a young man, a young teenage boy. But yeah, I mean, it's really not for the faint of heart. I mean, I get that's not an understatement at all. That's, yeah, for sure. So, and it took me a week to recover and decide to play it again to better prepare for this discussion. So,
That was not easy, I imagine.
no, indeed not. It's almost worse too because you like know what's going to happen. So then you're like,
Yeah.
oh no. Whereas the first time you're like, oh, what's happening? So,
Hmm.
anything else?
I just like to thank you once again for putting this together. I was very happy to
Uh,
do it.
it was a pleasure. Hopefully it's not the last time, but I'm glad that our first time together was with The Last of Us Part 2 discussion. Months in the
Yes.
making. And it's twice the length of what we thought it was going to be. So apologies for taking your Sunday away from me. Actually, you
No,
still have a Sunday left.
that's right. It's only
It's my
4:30.
Sunday. That's, yeah,
Yep.
going a little bit. Well, this time I'd like to pimp you out as it were. Where where can people, listeners, viewers find and support you?
Well, I guess the primary thing that people would say is Twitter. So you can find me at Harrison Chute, I think. But I also do a podcast with my buddy Donovan called That Rapscallion. It's called Questions You Don't Have Answers. You can find it at qnoanswers.com. And it's more of a political focused situation. And then I do solo for now anyway. I do a YouTube channel called With Eyes East, which is specifically about Asian cinema and culture, which I think is interesting.
Yep. Which I think, right, soon we'll do something on.
Hayao Miyazaki
Yeah.
or Studio Ghibli. Yeah.
Hopefully.
It's in the works.
We've got some library items to get through for sure. But yeah, so that would be exciting. Yeah,
Yes,
they
look
don't
forward
have
to it.
answers, folks. So don't go thinking that they've solved the world. Oh my goodness. Well, remember you can send any questions or comments to backrolltheoracle@gmail.com. Do you have an email if people have questions for you that you would like them to send it to?
Yeah, sure. Podcast emails. We'll do you qnoanswers@gmail.com.
There you go. You can find the show on Google Play and Stitcher, like the show on Facebook, or follow it on Twitter at BackrollTheOracle. Follow the Batman Universe on Facebook and Twitter as well, and support the Batman Universe by subscribing to Patreon. And now you can subscribe to Backroll the Oracle, the YouTube channel, which I'm starting to clean it up. It looks a little bit better, so you can do that now. Thank you so much again for coming on and spending your time on this. This was epic. I loved it, and I loved just pulling it apart. It's yeah, I like to do that with video games. So thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, well, once again, thanks to Mile High did I do that already? For sponsoring Backroll the Oracle, the Barbara Gordon podcast. Next time, I think I'm alone. I'm taking a break from the podcasting co-hosts, and so I'll just do something on my own. But until then, do you want to say the tagline? Do you know what the tagline is?
Oh, I can see it. Fly on, Babs lovers.
Thank you. Okay.